Hey guys. Tonight we begin with a country that somehow manages to be brilliant, chaotic, ambitious, and deeply confused all at once. You look at the United States and think, surely a place this loud and opinionated must have a perfectly sensible past. But no. Its history is a carnival ride, where every turn reveals another decision that makes you whisper, who approved that? From presidents wrestling larger-than-life problems to towns inventing holidays no one asked for, the story of America is not just wild, it is creatively unhinged. And as you settle in, you start to sense that the nation you live in was built on choices so strange you would almost admire them if they were not real. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm, and be sure to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step into the early colonial world expecting order or at least some hint of competence, but what greets you is a settlement that feels like a group project assigned by fate to people who never exchanged a single note. The air smells of damp timber and nervous ambition. A line of settlers argue near a half-built fence, each insisting they know how tall a proper fence should be, even though none of them have seen one built outside a sketch on crumpled parchment. They gesture wildly with tools they barely know how to hold, and you suspect the fence may collapse out of pure embarrassment. Nearby, a cluster of women debate which crops should go where. One insists on corn because she heard the locals grow it flawlessly. Another pushes wheat because her grandmother once said it thrives in any soil that respects itself. A third suggests trying everything until something grows, which sounds sensible until you realize they are about to plant beans in a patch of land currently occupied by a colony of very offended rabbits. The rabbits stare as if filing mental complaints. You walk farther and overhear a man scolding a squirrel for looking at his food stores too casually. He points a shaking finger at the creature, announcing that he knows a thief when he sees one. The squirrel blinks, unthreatened and undoubtedly planning its next move. A few paces away, a hunter swears that wolves are forming a union and plotting coordinated raids. Another claims the raccoons are working as spies, which makes you wonder how long it takes a raccoon to fill out espionage paperwork. At the center of the settlement, a meeting is underway, though meeting feels generous. It resembles a theatrical argument performed by people who never rehearsed together. The topic shifts from housing shortages to tool shortages to moral shortages, delivered with equal passion. One man insists that good manners alone will keep the colony alive. He demonstrates by bowing to an empty chair, then scolding a boy for eating without permission from an elder who is currently lost in the woods. Another argues that manners are pointless without sturdy roofs, which is bold coming from someone whose house collapsed yesterday because he forgot to attach the back wall. When he mentions this, he blames the wind. You wander toward a field where someone is testing a homemade plow that looks determined to injure him. He grips the handles and shouts that he is inventing progress, though the plow disagrees and throws him forward with a stubborn clank. The observers nod solemnly, as if they too have been flung by innovation. Behind them, a group practices milking goats, which goes poorly for everyone involved, especially the goats. No matter where you look, someone is arguing. A pair of settlers shout about the correct way to greet neighbors. One insists you must bow slightly or risk inviting chaos into your home. The other advocates for a firm handshake, though he has yet to meet a single person willing to shake his hand, possibly because it is covered in sap for reasons he refuses to explain. A woman joins the debate to declare that greetings do not matter if wolves truly are forming a union. Farther down the path, you hear a preacher attempt to inspire hope, but half his congregation is distracted by a turkey wandering confidently between them. The bird stops at his feet as if demanding inclusion in the sermon. A few settlers step back, whispering that turkeys must be some kind of omen. The preacher tries to continue but loses his place when the turkey lets out a noise that sounds suspiciously like commentary. You keep moving, noticing that the settlement, for all its bickering, has an undeniable spirit. These people came across an ocean, trusting maps drawn by men who had never seen the land themselves, and now they are trying to build lives with nothing but tools, rumors, and questionable optimism. They fail constantly, loudly, and sometimes heroically. A single family attempts to raise a barn using ropes tied in ways that defy physics. Another plants an herb garden without knowing what any of the herbs look like. When asked how they will identify them later, they say they plan to smell each one and trust their instincts, though their instincts have led them astray before. You watch as the sun dips below the tree line, casting long shadows over a settlement that never truly quiets. Arguments soften into tired murmurs, tools clatter into storage, and the wildlife resumes its silent surveillance of the strange new neighbors. You sense that nothing here is certain, and everything is improvised. Yet as evening settles, something steadier appears beneath the chaos. A stubborn willingness to try again tomorrow, even if tomorrow brings new debates about fences, manners, crops, and whether the raccoons are plotting their next strategic operation. You step into the Puritan world and immediately feel the weight of rules thick in the air, as if the colony itself has been quilted out of commandments stitched by people who worry joy might sneak in uninvited. The meeting house sits at the center, squat and stern, and you sense it watches everyone like a chaperone who is convinced the children are plotting something terrible, such as smiling. The townsfolk shuffle past with the kind of discipline that suggests consequence lurks behind every gesture. A man coughs twice and then glances around nervously, unsure whether coughing twice violates some new ordinance written this morning. A council gathers on a wooden platform, parchment in hand, ready to unveil fresh decrees. You expect matters of survival or governance, but instead hear them announce that whistling after sunset is now forbidden because it invites wickedness, and also because someone found it irritating. Another member proposes a rule stating that no one may wear boots with too much enthusiasm, which raises questions no one dares ask. They explain that unrestrained stomping may awaken disruptive impulses in the heart. The townsfolk nod along, their faces arranged into careful seriousness, as though they agree in principle, even if they have no idea what disruptive impulses look like. You drift toward a group of women who are sewing in stiff-backed silence. One murmurs that laughter should be avoided during sewing circles because it may tempt the needle to slip. Another adds that too much mirth lures mischievous spirits. When a third woman tries to lighten the mood by commenting on the absurdity of spirits possessing sewing needles, everyone falls silent. They glance toward the meeting house, worried that the walls themselves are preparing to take notes for the council. A child runs by, chased by another, both giggling the way children are built to do. A stern elder stops them with a raised hand. Play is permitted, he explains, but only if done with calm faces and measured movements. The children attempt to nod solemnly, though the younger one's lips tremble as though resisting the gravitational pull of laughter. Behind them, their mother pretends to tie her apron while whispering that sometimes she misses the old world, where children were allowed to act like children. She straightens quickly when another elder passes, transforming her face into a model of somber virtue. Inside a nearby home, a family debates whether singing during chores is a moral hazard. The father argues that rhythm distracts the mind from piety, while the mother insists a little melody prevents the youngest from falling asleep while fetching water. The eldest suggests humming quietly as a compromise, though they agree that humming cannot exceed a certain volume, lest the neighbors hear and suspect the household is indulging in comfort. You notice how often suspicion is the backbone of these conversations, as if comfort itself is lurking around corners, waiting to sabotage their salvation. Outside, a man is meticulously measuring the shadows cast by trees, explaining that long shadows encourage sinful imagination, so he plans to cut any tree that exceeds his approved moral length. His neighbor listens thoughtfully, then proposes a community rule requiring the trimming of all decorative branches to ensure no one dreams too vividly at night. It is unclear how tree branches influence dreams, but the neighbor insists he once dreamt vividly after sitting beneath an oak, which is evidence enough for new regulation. As evening approaches, a group gathers by the water to discuss the appropriate way to observe rest. One man suggests that walking too briskly on the Sabbath is practically a sprint toward temptation, and therefore should be illegal. Another proposes banning the frying of food on holy days because it produces smells that may stir earthly desires. A woman timidly asks whether boiling water is acceptable, and the leaders debate this earnestly, weighing the spiritual consequences of steam. You start to see the pattern. Every rule emerges not from doctrine carved into stone, but from the anxious creativity of people with too much quiet time and an unfriendly relationship with leisure. They are trying to keep the world tidy by labeling every feeling, gesture, and breeze as either dangerous or permitted. You sense their sincerity, but also the heavy boredom pressing on them, the kind that seeks expression through structure. A man who looks like he has not smiled since birth creates a rule that prohibits smiling at livestock because it may embolden the animals. Another insists clapping is undignified unless performed during storms to remind the heavens of human devotion. Night settles, and the colony calms, though even silence feels supervised. Windows glow faintly as families settle into disciplined bedtime routines. Somewhere a pen scratches out new rules for tomorrow. You walk through the dim streets, sensing the strange balance of faith, fear, and restlessness. The Puritans strive for holiness, yes, but they also seem fueled by the uneasy suspicion that if they stop creating rules, someone somewhere might accidentally enjoy themselves. You move through the early settlements, expecting to find an economy anchored in grand visions, or at least sensible trade, but instead, you find everything orbiting around a creature that looks like it should be worrying about dam repairs rather than shaping the fate of entire colonies. The beaver appears harmless enough, waddling along the riverbank with the calm confidence of an animal unaware that humans have declared it an unofficial currency. Traders watch it the way bankers watch gold, their eyes wide, calculating, and slightly feverish. One man whispers that the beaver is the backbone of civilization now, which tells you a great deal about the level of organization in the colonies. The settlers explain with great seriousness that beaver pelts are the key to everything. Food, tools, alliances, even peace treaties revolve around the availability of these furry treasures. A merchant shows you a ledger filled with neat handwriting and small doodles of beavers in the margins. He insists his drawings are purely professional, but the way he stares at them suggests otherwise. He tells you 1 pelt buys enough supplies to keep a family alive through winter, while 10 pelts might convince a governor to pretend he likes you. You follow a group of trappers trudging into the forest, each carrying gear that looks both practical and deeply questionable. They whisper strategies as though preparing for battle. One swears that humming softly attracts beavers. Another claims humming scares them away. A third says the trick is to think like a beaver, though he admits he has no idea what a beaver thinks about beyond trees and existential swimming. They argue over the correct way to approach a river, and by the time they reach the water, they have changed their plan 3 times and forgotten why they left camp in the first place. The beavers, meanwhile, glide through the water with serene indifference. They slap their tails as if mocking human ambition. You watch one build an intricate dam, a structure so carefully designed it could outlast half the houses in the colony. The trappers nod in admiration, claiming this engineering proves the beaver is a noble adversary. Then they set their traps with the solemnity of men who believe they are participating in a spiritual duel. Back in the settlement, trading posts bustle with chaotic energy. Pelts are piled impossibly high, making the entire room smell like damp ambition. Traders haggle with the intensity of diplomats negotiating borders, each insisting their pelts are fluffier, glossier, or spiritually superior to others. One man swears his beavers lived fulfilling lives, and therefore their pelts carry a natural radiance. No one believes him, but they admire his confidence. You overhear a heated conversation between 2 colonial officials. They argue about how many beaver pelts should be required for certain taxes, and whether pelts can replace currency entirely. One insists that if Europe can rely on coins, the colonies can rely on fur. The other counters that beavers are unreliable employees who refuse to be bred for economic stability. They both agree that the situation is becoming complicated, but neither has any alternative to offer. News arrives from distant settlements about feuds erupting over trapping grounds. One report describes an argument so intense that both sides threaten to confiscate each other's hats, which apparently is a meaningful insult in a world where hats are made of the very creature being fought over. Another message warns that tribes allied with French traders are gaining an advantage, leading to panicked discussions about recruiting more trappers, building better trade routes, or simply praying the beaver population does not unionize. As the day unfolds, you begin to see how deeply this creature has woven itself into colonial life. Fur hats become status symbols. Pelts serve as bargaining chips in negotiations you did not realize required bargaining. People speak of beavers, with the reverence usually reserved for saints or extremely generous relatives. A preacher even tries to incorporate the beaver into a sermon about divine provision, though he struggles to make the metaphor graceful. When evening falls, the traders gather around the fire and tell stories about legendary beavers, animals so clever and elusive that they have become folklore. One tale describes a beaver who stole a trap, outsmarted 3 men, and built a dam shaped like a crown just to prove a point. Another recounts a beaver who supposedly traded its own pelt in exchange for peace, though the logistics of that remain unclear. You watch the flames flicker and realize that this small, unassuming creature has altered trade, diplomacy, and the entire mood of the colonies. The settlers speak of national identity and economic destiny while clutching pelts like precious relics. The beaver, unaware of its influence, continues shaping rivers one branch at a time, while humans attempt to shape history with fur. You step into a frontier town as dust swirls around your boots and the sun hangs low over buildings that look as if they were hammered together by people racing a thunderstorm. The wind carries voices, sharp and restless, and you quickly learn that every disagreement here carries the potential to escalate into a duel. Not a calm discussion or a thoughtful compromise, but a duel, as if the entire population agreed that the best way to handle social tension is by dramatically risking bodily harm before lunchtime. You pass a saloon where 2 men argue over the ownership of a chicken that escaped both their yards, and the conversation ends with them stepping into the street, hands twitching toward holsters as bystanders begin placing wagers. The chicken, unaware of its role in civic conflict, waddles behind a water trough with an air of tired resignation, as though used to sparking territorial wars. A local sheriff watches the standoff, sighs deeply, and then strolls away because he has decided to conserve his energy for crimes committed after supper. You sense that his job is not to prevent fights, but to make sure they do not interfere with important matters like mealtime or Sunday sermons. Even the preacher, you discover, has officiated duels after failing to convince participants that forgiveness is spiritually superior to bullets. As you walk past the general store, a heated debate erupts over the price of flour. One customer claims the storekeeper raised prices out of greed. The storekeeper counters by accusing the customer of buying flour irresponsibly. Before the argument matures into anything resembling logic, someone suggests settling the dispute outside. The customer agrees so quickly you suspect he has been waiting all week for an excuse to duel someone. A small crowd gathers, eager for entertainment, passing around snacks as though duels are community picnics. The duel ends with both men missing their shots, staring at each other with embarrassment, and resolving the disagreement by flipping a coin because their aim has undermined their confidence. You wander farther and observe a barber whose sign advertises haircuts, shaves, and officiating duels at half price if the participants buy pomade. He proudly displays a chart that ranks the most common duel causes: property lines, livestock trespass, romantic misunderstandings, and something simply labeled general annoyance. According to the barber, general annoyance currently leads by a wide margin. He explains this while trimming a man's beard. both of them nodding sagely, as if duels are the frontier's natural method of conflict ventilation. Beyond the barber's shop, you see two women arguing over who owns a patch of sunflowers. Their voices rise, their eyes narrow, and the townsfolk brace for yet another showdown. Instead, the women decide to settle the matter with a baking contest, which draws a crowd twice as large as any duel. The sheriff attends this one enthusiastically, sampling pastries as if performing civic duty. You watch as tensions melt under the smell of warm bread, leading you to suspect that perhaps duels are not the only method available, just the one the town uses when no one is hungry. Near the outskirts, a rancher struggles with a broken fence. Another rancher claims the fence is on his land. They argue with the desperation of men who know repairing the fence means actual labor. They choose to duel instead of measuring property boundaries, a decision that feels suspiciously like laziness disguised as honor. When their duel begins, both men aim toward the sky, firing warning shots because neither wishes to risk injury before their evening chores. They return to the fence afterward and quietly repair it together, grumbling about the heat and pretending the duel never happened. In the local tavern, someone announces a community meeting to address the rising number of duels. Attendance is high until everyone learns the meeting will involve extended conversation. Interest fades quickly. A few residents linger long enough to propose new rules that might reduce unnecessary conflict, but the suggestions collapse when no one can agree on what unnecessary means. Eventually, the meeting dissolves into a duel between two men arguing over the definition of compromise. Their shots miss, as usual, and they settle the matter by arm wrestling instead. You leave the town at sunset as the air hums with gossip about tomorrow's anticipated disputes. The sky glows orange, and silhouettes of wooden buildings stretch across the dusty road. You sense a strange rhythm here, a restless energy disguised as honor, tradition, and entertainment. The frontier has countless problems, but its people seem convinced they can outshoot them, even if their aim is questionable. The duels settle nothing lasting, yet everyone sleeps better believing they have upheld some form of justice, even if justice in this place looks suspiciously like ritualized stubbornness. You arrive in a cramped wooden courthouse that smells faintly of ink, hay, and the anxious perspiration of people pretending they know how justice works. The benches creak beneath a crowd buzzing with excitement, which strikes you as odd until you notice the defendant, a goat, tied loosely to a post near the judge, chewing calmly on a document that might be relevant to its own case. The judge bangs his gavel with great authority, which does nothing to stop the goat from finishing the paper with admirable efficiency. You start to wonder how a legal system reaches the point where livestock can be declared a menace to society, but no one else appears troubled. They lean forward eagerly, as if trials involving goats are premium entertainment and not a symptom of administrative confusion. The prosecutor clears his throat and declares that the goat stole grain, overturned a bucket, and stared too aggressively at a neighbor. He delivers these accusations with the gravity of a man unveiling evidence of treason. He gestures dramatically at the goat, which glances back with the indifferent wisdom of a creature unconcerned with human institutions. When the prosecutor presents a piece of chewed cloth as evidence, the goat bleats loudly, and half the audience nods as if this proves everything. You sit there wondering who will cross-examine the goat, and whether any amount of chewing noise will be considered incriminating. A witness takes the stand to describe, in vivid detail, how the goat once knocked over her laundry. The judge listens solemnly, writing notes as if chronicling a major crime. Another witness testifies that the goat trespassed in his garden and ate carrots essential for his winter survival. As he describes the incident, he grows increasingly emotional, insisting the goat's expression revealed malicious intent. The judge murmurs sympathetically, though he also glances toward the goat with suspicion, as if suddenly aware he may be in the presence of a criminal mastermind with an advanced understanding of root vegetables. You watch the defense, which consists of a man who admits he is not the goat's owner but feels called to speak on its behalf. He argues that goats cannot form malicious intent and should not be punished for behaving according to their nature. His words are reasonable, But his argument loses force when the goat bites his sleeve and attempts to eat his notes. The audience gasps, convinced this is further proof of guilt. The judge strokes his chin and announces that the goat's hunger appears excessive, which might indicate a turbulent moral character. To your astonishment, the trial continues with a formality that suggests no one sees the absurdity. The court clerk reads charges to the goat as though expecting it to respond. A bailiff stands guard with the painful seriousness of a man who fears the goat may bolt and ruin the dignity of the proceedings. A small child whispers to her mother that she hopes the goat wins, and the mother hushes her, reminding her this is a serious matter. Around you, people discuss potential sentencing, from relocation to the far pasture to temporary confinement in a pen, as if debating where a hardened outlaw should serve time. You drift toward another case as curiosity pulls you through a side door. This courtroom contains a chicken on trial for destroying property, specifically a line of seedlings belonging to a local farmer. The chicken paces inside a small enclosure, feathers ruffled in a way that makes it look simultaneously guilty and annoyed. The farmer insists the chicken knew precisely what it was doing. He claims its eyes held defiance. The judge nods thoughtfully, though you suspect he is mostly enjoying the chance to preside over matters that do not involve neighbors throwing punches. The chicken's defense is handled by a girl who argues that the bird should be released because it possesses no awareness of the law. Her argument is persuasive until the chicken flaps its wings and knocks over a water bucket. The audience yelps as if this is an insult to the institution of justice. Someone mutters that the chicken is mocking the court. The judge, clearly flustered, orders the bailiff to restrain the bird, a command that results in a brief chase around the benches. The crowd watches with the same enthusiasm they reserve for parades. As the day ends, you realize these trials serve multiple purposes. They resolve disputes, entertain the community, and distract from the harshness of frontier life. People gather to judge animals because judging each other feels too dangerous, and because assigning criminal motives to livestock gives them the illusion of order in a world that rarely offers any. You leave the courthouse as lanterns flicker to life, listening to the murmurs of townsfolk still discussing verdicts with earnest conviction. In this place, justice may be questionable, but the enthusiasm for enforcing it remains unwavering, even when the defendants chew on the evidence and stare blankly at their accusers. You enter the hall expecting a solemn council of brilliant minds crafting the future of a nation, but what you find instead is a room full of men who alternate between profound wisdom and the kind of improvisation usually associated with children building forts. The air smells of ink, wool, and the particular strain of stress that comes from trying to create a government in a building with questionable ventilation. Papers litter the tables like fallen leaves, quills scratch in frantic spurts, and every few minutes someone raises his voice about matters so different in scale that your mind struggles to keep pace. On one side of the hall, delegates argue passionately about fundamental freedoms, the structure of governance, and the terrifying possibility that the colonies might, after all this, still be stuck paying unreasonable taxes. They speak with a gravity that could tip the earth if concentrated in one place. A man lists grievances against the crown so eloquently you feel history shift beneath your feet. Another counters by warning that unity is fragile and they must tread carefully. Their voices weave a tapestry of purpose, steady and deliberate, as if they were born for this moment. Then you turn and notice the others. This group debates topics so bewildering you suspect they may be drafting a constitution for a different universe. One man suggests that legislative disputes be settled by foot races because he believes cardio builds character. Another proposes dividing states according to average rainfall, a method he claims is both fair and spiritually calming. A third presents a compromise involving rotating capitals so no one grows too attached to a single building. He argues that constant relocation will keep the government agile and prevent furniture from becoming complacent. The room sways between these worlds, one of solemn nation building and one of creative chaos. A delegate with a spectacular wig stands up to propose a unified currency, a serious and practical suggestion only to be interrupted by another who insists the currency should feature inspirational animals. He recommends the turkey, praising its noble personality. A few men nod thoughtfully. Others stare at the table as if contemplating escape. You sense that half of the room is trying to craft a coherent country, while the other half is either bored, hungry, or simply fascinated by birds. You drift closer to a heated discussion about military organization. One man insists on clear ranks and disciplined structure, while another proposes a coded whistle system inspired by local shepherds. He demonstrates several whistles that echo embarrassingly through the hall, causing delegates across the room to pause their serious debate and question whether the sheep have joined the political process. After a moment of awkward silence, someone suggests recording the whistles in the official minutes, just in case they become relevant later. At a large table near the front, a group debates the balance of power between the states. Voices rise, hands gesture, and tension thickens like soup, until one delegate suggests that states settle disputes by temporarily swapping governors. He describes it as a bonding exercise. His neighbor proposes that states share rotating mascots to promote unity. You see men who have dedicated their lives to reason momentarily lose all composure as they try to explain why mascots might not be the cornerstone of federal stability. Yet somehow, despite the chaos, moments of clarity strike the room with quiet force. A delegate stands and reads a passage about liberty that silences everyone. Even the man who proposed mascots looks genuinely moved. Another outlines a vision of a government built on representation rather than rule by accident of birth. These moments settle over the hall like dust finding its place, and you sense that the unsteady foundation is strengthening, but it never lasts long. Someone asks how long representatives should serve, and within minutes, the debate devolves into imaginative alternatives. One man insists leaders should serve until they feel spiritually complete. Another proposes terms determined by lottery, as if the entire government could run like a raffle at a country fair. A third suggests electing leaders based on the length of their sideburns, which he claims reveals sincerity. The hours stretch as brilliant ideas and preposterous theories collide. The hall becomes a place where destiny and improvisation mingle freely, as if the future is being shaped by both philosophers and enthusiastic hobbyists. You realize the miracle is not that the Congress produces a functional government, but that it produces anything at all while balancing the ambitions of visionaries and the whims of men who occasionally derail the conversation because they are distracted by lunch. As the session ends and delegates file out, you sense the peculiar alchemy of the room. These men are forging a nation with equal parts principle and improvisation, stitching together a future from conviction, compromise, and the occasional turkey reference. The world outside waits for a document that will define a people, unaware that half its authors are still arguing about whether the national seal should include a sunbeam, a snake, or a creature someone sketched during a moment of boredom. You follow Benjamin Franklin through the narrow streets of Philadelphia and immediately sense that you are trailing someone who operates on a wavelength unavailable to the average human. He moves with the brisk confidence of a man who has already decided he can improve everything around him, from the postal system to the way people light candles. His pockets bulge with tools, scraps of paper, mysterious metal bits, and something that might be a half-assembled experiment. Every few steps, he pauses, squints at an object, and mutters that it could be better, which suggests he spends his days locked in a perpetual battle with the concept of inefficiency. You watch him stop in front of a street lamp and declare that it produces light inefficiently. He taps it, circles it, taps it again, then explains to a bewildered passerby that he has devised a superior design. The passerby nods politely, but Franklin is already halfway down the street, scribbling diagrams without noticing he has walked straight into a cart of apples. The apples scatter, the cart owner curses, and Franklin apologizes while simultaneously suggesting a better wheel design. The cart owner blinks, halfway between anger and hesitant admiration, because Franklin delivers his suggestions with the charm of a man who genuinely believes the universe is a collaborative project. He enters a coffee house with the energy of someone who plans to revolutionize the beverage industry, but starts instead by reorganizing the sugar containers. Discussions erupt around him, yet he drifts between them with ease, listening to arguments about politics, science, and trade, before inserting a clever observation that silences everyone. You realize he has the rare talent of speaking in a way that makes people believe he has solved their problems, even if they do not fully understand his solution. One man complains about damp shoes, and Franklin launches into an explanation of airflow, condensation, and personal responsibility. The man nods slowly, as if receiving divine instruction. Franklin pulls you outside again without warning, his coat flapping behind him like the wings of a distracted bird. He leads you toward his workshop, a room overflowing with invention. Tools are scattered everywhere, and half-formed ideas cling to the walls as sketches. You spot something that looks like a stove, something that looks like a musical instrument, and something that looks like an accident waiting to happen. He explains them all with equal enthusiasm. The stove is meant to heat homes more efficiently. The instrument is part of his ongoing exploration of sound. The accident waiting to happen is a prototype that he describes as promising, though he cannot remember what it is supposed to do. Outside, the sky darkens, and Franklin becomes suddenly alert. He peers upward with a curious gleam you have seen only in people preparing to test fate. He rummages through drawers until he finds a key, a length of string, and something resembling a kite. You already sense the decision forming in his mind, the same decision that has worried his friends for years. He announces calmly that he is going to prove something important about electricity. He does not elaborate. You consider the fact that storms kill people, but Franklin strides forward as if lightning is a misunderstood acquaintance who simply needs proper introduction. As raindrops begin to fall, you follow him reluctantly, watching him release the kite into the churning sky. He handles it with the gentle precision of a man, confident that nature will cooperate out of respect. The wind pulls, the string hums, and Franklin studies the motion with delighted fascination. He speaks aloud to himself, praising the beauty of natural forces while completely ignoring the growing concern on your face. When a spark finally dances along the key, Franklin beams with triumph. You take a cautious step back, wondering whether genius always looks so much like cheerful self-endangerment. He returns to town soaked and radiant, telling everyone that the experiment was a success while offering no details. People gather around him like moths around a lantern, drawn in by his enthusiasm. Some clap him on the back. Others shake their heads, muttering that the man is one storm short of catastrophe. Yet all of them listen, because even when Franklin's ideas flirt with chaos, they carry a spark that lights imagination. You see how his inventions, writings, and schemes ripple outward, shaping lives in ways both sensible and questionably ambitious. By nightfall, he is back at his desk, writing letters, drafting proposals, and absent-mindedly inventing something with gears. His candle flickers as he works, and every so often he pauses to jot down a proverb for future Americans who will someday quote him without knowing he wrote it while trying to fix a squeaky chair. You stand in the corner of the room, watching the pages pile up, sensing that he is not simply building devices or documents. He is building the essence of a country still learning how to define itself. And you cannot quite decide whether he is a brilliant architect of progress or a force of nature disguised as a man. You only know that wherever he goes, ideas follow, chaos follows, and history follows too, trying its best to keep up. You arrive just in time to witness two early states arguing over a stretch of land that looks, to your eyes, like a perfectly ordinary patch of wilderness. A few trees, a bend in a river, some rocks shaped more or less like rocks. Nothing that seems worth the rising volume of voices or the way both delegations point at maps as though the maps themselves have committed personal offense. One man insists the river clearly tilts east, which means the land belongs to his state. Another argues the river tilts west, which means the first man needs spectacles. A third claims the river used to tilt east, but recently changed its mind, and therefore historical tilting should be considered. You stand between them, watching the dispute escalate, with the contagious enthusiasm of children discovering a box of crayons and immediately debating who gets the brightest color. The maps do not help. They are hand-drawn, smudged, and suspiciously artistic, as if the cartographers were more interested in expressing their emotions than recording geography. One map shows mountains where there are none. Another features a lake in the shape of a lopsided heart, and the delegate presenting it assures everyone the shape is symbolic. A third map displays the disputed land as an empty space with the words, "We think something is here," scribbled in the margin. The officials study these documents with solemn concentration, turning them sideways, then upside down, as though a better angle might transform uncertainty into clarity. You drift toward another argument where two states dispute a forest so dense neither delegation has actually seen the center. One man swears his state owns it because his cousin once wandered inside and returned wearing leaves he claimed were native to the area. The opposing delegate scoffs, insisting the leaves were decorative and likely purchased in a neighboring town. Both sides argue until someone suggests walking into the forest to check, but the idea is immediately rejected because the forest contains bears, and no one wishes to negotiate with bears. Nearby, a heated debate erupts about a hill no one wants responsibility for, but both states refuse to relinquish. One delegate argues that surrendering the hill would imply weakness. Another says keeping the hill would imply foolishness. A compromise is proposed where each state claims the hill on alternating days. Someone then asks who controls it during leap years, which sparks an entirely new argument that overshadows the original one. By the time the discussion ends, no one remembers why the hill mattered, but they all agree the other side had an unacceptable tone. You step into a tent where a group of officials attempt diplomacy through sketching. They huddle around parchment, drawing lines meant to represent boundaries, but the lines grow increasingly elaborate. One man adds swirls because they help him think. Another doodles livestock to remind everyone why the land is important. Soon the map resembles a child's imaginative landscape, complete with spirals, stick figures, and a goat wearing a crown. They stare at the results as if contemplating the mysteries of existence. In another settlement, tempers flare over a road that zigzags between two states in such an inconvenient pattern that travelers routinely cross borders without meaning to. One delegate insists the road must be straightened for efficiency. Another counters that the zigzag shape has historic value. A third suggests turning the road into a shared national treasure, though no one can define what that means. The debate grows so intense that a bystander proposes drawing a brand new road entirely, which draws horrified gasps. Starting over, they say, would be an insult to the ancestors, even though the ancestors designed the road while fleeing a thunderstorm and drawing the path in mud. As the day progresses, you begin to notice the true heart of these border disputes. They are not really about land. They are about pride, identity, and the unshakable belief that each state deserves the best crayon in the box, even if the crayon is broken, worn down, or suspiciously chewed. You watch grown men pace and gesture with the restless energy of children trying to defend their artistic territory. The land becomes symbolic, a way to assert that their state is strong, clever, and not to be pushed around by neighbors. By sunset, some disputes have cooled, others simmer, and a few continue with renewed vigor as lanterns flicker along the meeting tents. The river still tilts in whatever direction people insist it does. The forest remains unvisited, the hill remains unloved, and the maps remain confusing works of abstract expressionism. You leave the gathering with the realization that early states built borders not with clear logic, but with stubborn enthusiasm, each convinced that the lines they fought for would someday mean something important, even if, in the moment, they were simply arguing over crayons drawn across a continent that none of them had fully explored. You step into a Revolutionary War camp moments before dawn, when the sky is a pale wash of gray and the air tastes like wood smoke and questionable decisions. Tents sag under blankets of frost, and scattered around them are soldiers trying to solve problems the army never anticipated. You watch a man attempt to repair his boots with nothing but twine, determination, and a wooden spoon. He claims the spoon adds structural integrity. You are certain it adds confusion. Another soldier wanders past carrying a musket tied together with strips of cloth, explaining cheerfully that if it cannot fire, it can at least function as a persuasive stick. As you move deeper into camp, you notice fires struggling against a damp wind. Over one fire hangs a pot of something that might be stew or might be a culinary mistake passed down through generations of soldiers who believed spices were a form of witchcraft. The men surrounding it argue about ingredients, each insisting his grandmother used the same method, which is impressive considering none of their grandmothers ever lived in a war camp. Someone suggests adding a shoe for flavor, and judging by the smell, you suspect someone already has. Nearby, a group of soldiers tries to invent winter clothing from scraps of uniforms, wool blankets, and whatever fabric they can find. One man wraps himself in a quilt so large it trails behind him like a royal cape, insisting it adds authority to his posture. Another attaches rabbit pelts to his coat sleeves, claiming it improves morale, though you think he simply enjoys the sensation of soft ears brushing his elbows. A third soldier stands shirtless despite the cold, announcing boldly that he refuses to surrender his warmth to weather psychology. He shivers through the declaration, but his pride remains intact. A wagon rattles into camp carrying supplies that no one remembers requesting. Inside, you find barrels of nails, a sack of turnips, and a single rope that is exactly 3 inches long, useless to everyone except the man who takes it anyway, saying he likes a challenge. The officers sort through the goods and attempt to distribute them with the solemnity of priests handing out sacred relics. The turnips disappear fastest, not because anyone wants them, but because soldiers hoard them out of habit, as if a turnip today protects against starvation tomorrow. A group gathers to repair a cannon that has decided it will only fire when it feels like it. One soldier taps the barrel gently, whispering encouragement as if the cannon is a nervous horse. Another suggests feeding it gunpowder with compliments. A third shakes his head, convinced the machine is possessed and only responds to threats. You watch as they alternate between cajoling and scolding it until finally, with a rebellious roar, the cannon fires a shot that startles half the camp and knocks over a tent no one was using anyway. The men celebrate as though they have unlocked ancient magic. Across the field, a sergeant oversees the creation of improvised fortifications. Soldiers drag tree branches, broken carts, and a suspicious number of barrels into a loose barricade. Someone adds a decorative flag fashioned from a torn shirt and a stick he proudly calls his command staff. The structure leans precariously, looking like an enthusiastic but confused beaver built it. Still, the sergeant nods with satisfaction, muttering that it will at least confuse the enemy, which might be the camp's true strategy. As the sun climbs higher, the camp becomes a buzzing hive of invention. Soldiers sharpen bayonets on rocks, patch coats with leather scraps, and create strategies that sound brilliant when whispered around fires and less brilliant when spoken aloud. One man swears he can improve accuracy by aiming with one eye closed and then switching eyes mid-shot. Another tries to waterproof his hat with candle wax, turning it into a glistening helmet of questionable utility. Yet through all the improvisation, something else lingers in the air, warm and stubborn. The soldier's creativity is not born from luxury. It rises from necessity, pride, and the unshakable belief that even without proper supplies or official instructions, they will make something work. Watching them, you realize that the war is held together not just by generals and declarations, but by men who turn spoons into tools, blankets into armor, and chaos into something resembling survival. You slip into the earliest presidential elections expecting dignified speeches and calm debate, only to find something closer to a tavern quarrel wrapped in powdered wigs. Campaigns sprawl across town squares, newspapers, and whispered gossip with the energy of people discovering the joy of public arguing for the very first time. You watch supporters hand out pamphlets that read less like political critique and more like theatrical insults crafted by poets who have not slept in days. Candidates claim virtue and wisdom in their own ranks, while describing opponents as walking disasters who threaten the future, morality, and possibly the structural integrity of barns. You drift past a group of pamphleteers who work with the enthusiasm of street magicians, waving papers in the air and shouting accusations so vivid the crowd shifts uncomfortably. One claims a rival candidate secretly worships questionable foreign deities. Another swears the opposition plans to bankrupt the country and also ruin breakfast for generations. Someone else insists that if the other side wins, livestock will behave strangely and marriages will wither. The crowd absorbs all this with wide eyes, nodding solemnly as if they have just heard deep prophecy instead of political improv. In a nearby tavern, the arguments ferment as quickly as the ale. Patrons gather around tables covered in spilled drinks and half-eaten meals, debating with the intensity of philosophers but the logic of men trying to outshout one another. A supporter of one candidate slams his mug down, insisting the election is a battle for the soul of the young nation. His opponent counters that the real threat is the candidate whose eyebrows clearly suggest villainy. Several people murmur agreement, not because the claim makes sense, but because his eyebrows have indeed raised concerns. Outside, newspapers are printed in frantic batches. Some articles read like heroic epics, painting candidates as saviors destined to lead the nation toward greatness. Others resemble dramatic tragedies, predicting doom if voters choose poorly. One column claims a candidate plans to abolish fun. Another says his opponent intends to live forever and therefore cannot be trusted. The printers do not bother with subtlety. They already know what the public enjoys. You wander deeper into the Capitol, where campaign organizers gather beneath fluttering banners. They strategize with maps, lists, and expressions that suggest half confidence and half panic. One advisor urges restraint, insisting that voters respond to thoughtful discourse. Another waves him off, arguing that voters prefer spectacle, emotion, and at least one accusation of sorcery. The room hums with plans for speeches, rallies, and letters meant to stir hearts and unsettle nerves. No one seems entirely sure what will sway the nation, so they choose everything at once. As the election nears, the attacks grow sharper. Candidates label their rivals tyrants, cowards, aristocrats, radicals, and at least once, a menace to cucumbers. Crowds react with cheers, laughter, and the occasional gasp as if they are watching a stage play rather than the shaping of a government. The boundaries between truth and exaggeration dissolve, leaving only the gleeful thrill of dramatic conflict. You observe one candidate writing a rebuttal so fiery it might ignite the page, each sentence crafted like a dagger meant to be read aloud in town squares. Even those too polite to shout become deeply invested. Women in parlors whisper about campaigns over embroidery, their needles moving with swift precision every time a particularly sharp insult lands. Merchants debate while weighing produce, making decisions about national policy between apples and flour. Farmers speak across fence posts, comparing candidates based on character, rumor, and the persuasive power of catchy slogans. Every conversation vibrates with urgency, humor, and the unspoken hope that the Republic will survive these theatrical battles of ego. On Election Day, crowds gather in their finest clothes, wearing expressions that mix pride with mild apprehension. They cast their votes with dramatic seriousness, as though each ballot might be engraved in stone. When the results are tallied, the defeated candidate releases a statement declaring the nation has erred, while the victor delivers a triumphant speech that sounds slightly surprised, as though he cannot believe insults have carried him this far. As you drift away from the scene, you realize early elections are less orderly than expected and more spirited than anyone anticipated. They are chaotic displays of patriotism, theater, and creativity, shaped by a people still learning how to choose leaders while enjoying the spectacle of battle without muskets. The insults may be exaggerated, the arguments peculiar, but beneath it all lies the first pulse of a republic discovering its voice. You slip into the gallery of an early congressional session, expecting dignified men framed by sunlight and ideals. Instead, you find something closer to a backstage rehearsal where every actor insists on rewriting the script. The chamber hums with the restless energy of people who know they are making history, yet behave as though they are competing for the world's most dramatic performance. Representatives rise from their seats with the solemnity of prophets, only to argue about issues so mundane you wonder if the nation's future depends on the price of candles or the precise definition of a hallway. You watch one congressman pound the table to emphasize a point that no one asked for. He insists that postal routes must be redrawn because the current arrangement forces respectable citizens to ride past a tavern rumored to host morally unstable roosters. Another man counters that the roosters are perfectly respectable and that the real issue is whether mail carriers deserve new uniforms. Before he can elaborate, a third representative interrupts to declare uniforms unnecessary since dignity comes from within, not wool. This philosophical moment dissolves when someone mentions that wool is expensive, and suddenly half the chamber clutches their notes, already preparing new speeches about fiscal responsibility. Across the room, a committee meets to discuss something simple, like bridge repairs, but the conversation spirals until several members accuse one another of being secretly anti-bridge. Voices rise, papers shuffle, and someone dramatically sighs as if civilization itself hangs from a fraying rope. You glance toward the corner where two representatives glare at each other with theatrical intensity, the kind that suggests they have been feuding for so long they no longer remember why. One adjusts his coat with the precision of a man preparing for battle. The other mutters under his breath, vowing to oppose every proposal his rival supports, even if he secretly agrees with it. You drift toward a group debating tariffs with the tone of scholars and the posture of exhausted siblings sharing a cramped bedroom. They argue over percentages and shipments, each insisting their mathematical reasoning is flawless. Yet every time someone presents a number, another representative stands to challenge it with a counter number that appears equally confident and equally invented. Charts are drawn, erased, redrawn, and abandoned when the chalk snaps. A man in the back leans over to whisper that he blames the chaos on humidity. But humidity cannot explain why two grown men are now shouting about potatoes. In another corner, a pair of congressmen huddle over a document they both claim to have authored. One points out that his handwriting appears in the margins. The other argues that the handwriting is irrelevant because the idea originated in his heart. A witness attempts to mediate, but quickly retreats when both factions accuse him of taking sides. The dispute grows so intense the clerk quietly moves the ink bottles out of reach. You notice a small delegation attempting diplomacy through snacks. They offer biscuits to soften tempers, believing that hunger is responsible for half the arguments in the chamber. This strategy works for a moment until someone accuses them of using baked goods to influence legislation. A congressman stands to formally condemn the bribery of stomachs, though he pockets a biscuit before completing his moral declaration. Meanwhile, a rare moment of unity emerges when everyone agrees the ventilation in the chamber is unbearable. Several representatives attempt to open a window, but this requires a motion, which requires a second motion, which triggers a debate about whether the window truly needs opening. After 30 minutes of heated discussion, the window is raised exactly 1 inch. A few men collapse into their chairs as if they have secured a monumental victory. Through it all, the chamber remains strangely alive, a place where chaos mixes with purpose, and the nation's future is shaped by people who argue, fume, and occasionally produce brilliance between disagreements. You watch them bicker like actors crowded backstage, each craving applause, each convinced the story cannot continue without their line delivered perfectly. And yet, for all the noise, something steady pulses beneath it. A fragile, stubborn commitment to building a working government out of mismatched personalities and endless opinions. You listen to the rising chorus of arguments and realize the republic survives not because congressmen agree, but because they keep showing up to the stage. You drift into a courthouse on a warm afternoon, the kind where nothing important seems poised to happen, yet lawmakers gather with the determined expressions of people about to save civilization from imaginary threats. The small chamber smells of ink, dust, and the faint tension of individuals who have convinced themselves that the greatest dangers to society are squirrels, dancing, and the improper storage of pickles. You take a seat in the back, unnoticed, and watch as a debate unfolds with such earnestness you almost forget none of it is necessary. A legislator clears his throat and presents a proposal banning whistling after sunset. He explains that whistling attracts thieves, ghosts, or in one unfortunate anecdote, a neighbor's cow. Opponents rise to challenge him, not because they doubt the story, but because they insist the cow incident was personal and should not influence statewide policy. Voices rise as they argue about sound waves, livestock psychology, and whether citizens have a fundamental right to express musical frustration at night. The bill nearly passes before someone remembers the real danger is not whistling but poorly aimed lanterns, which derails the discussion entirely. You wander into the hallway where another committee meets. This one focused on preventing mischief by outlawing certain types of hats. One representative insists that tall hats inspire arrogance, while wide hats encourage laziness. A colleague counters that laziness cannot be blamed on hats, since laziness is clearly blamed on humidity. Someone attempts to introduce a scientific perspective, but is ignored because the room is already too invested in describing hat-related crimes that definitely never occurred. They vote to restrict hats in all government buildings, except on days of celebration, debate, or boredom. Outside, a gathering of citizens attends a public reading of new laws meant to safeguard moral behavior. The sheriff reads each rule with theatrical seriousness. One law prohibits eating fried foods on horseback, which earns polite nods from listeners until someone asks why such a law is necessary. The sheriff admits he once witnessed a rider spill hot grease and cause a minor stampede. The crowd accepts this as sufficient justification. Another law forbids keeping more than 3 goats within town limits unless one of them has a certificate of good conduct. No one knows how a goat earns such a certificate, but the idea satisfies everyone, so it passes without debate. Returning to the courthouse, you discover a heated discussion about marriage laws. A legislator argues that couples should complete a mandatory course on cooperation before receiving a license. Another argues that such a course would discourage marriage entirely, which might be the true intention. A third proposes that couples submit a list of shared goals, hobbies, and emergency snacking preferences. The debate escalates until someone proposes outlawing marriage on weekends to prevent impulsive decisions. For a moment, the idea gathers momentum, but cooler heads prevail when someone points out that weddings scheduled on weekdays would disrupt farming. You slip into another room where lawmakers attempt to regulate transportation. A man insists wagons should not exceed a mile per hour because faster movement encourages recklessness. Another claims that limiting speed would ruin commerce. A third suggests building more roads, which is immediately rejected as extravagant. They settle on a law requiring wagon drivers to announce their presence every 10 steps with a loud greeting. No one is sure how this improves safety, but the room agrees the image is charming. The day continues with more proposals. Banning the sale of excessively large pumpkins, regulating the emotional tone of public sermons, and requiring all dogs to complete obedience trials supervised by a clergyman. Each law sprouts from a single incident, magnified by imagination, then shaped into policy by people who treat inconvenience as Chris. You watch lawmakers scribble amendments with the intensity of artists adding the final strokes to a masterpiece no one requested. These laws accumulate like decorative clutter, created to solve problems so rare they may never occur again. Yet beneath the humor lies something oddly human. These lawmakers, with all their eccentric rules, believe they are protecting their communities. In their minds, every story is a warning, every inconvenience a threat, every peculiar bill a safeguard against the unknown. The laws may be unnecessary, excessive, or downright baffling, but they reflect the anxieties and hopes of people trying to tame a world they barely understand. As evening settles over the town, you leave the courthouse and listen to the quiet bustle of ordinary life. People walk home unaware that their legislators spent the day debating hats, goats, and nighttime whistling. You realize these strange laws, though impractical, are evidence of a nation still learning how to govern itself, one improbable rule at a time. You enter a cramped office smelling faintly of ink, old leather, and ambitious dreams. Inside, a group of land speculators stands around a table covered with maps that look more like wishful illustrations than accurate geography. Rivers curve in impossible ways, mountains appear where no mountains belong, and entire towns exist only as hopeful dots labeled with names no one can pronounce. The men speak with booming confidence, gesturing at vast territories they have never seen and may not actually exist. One of them taps a remote valley with his quill and declares it perfect farmland. When you ask if he has ever traveled there, he laughs, explaining that true visionaries do not need to visit a place before selling it. You watch as another speculator presents a parchment describing a scenic meadow. The description includes gentle breezes, fertile soil, and a hill shaped like a sleeping bear. He reads it with poetic flair, but when pressed for detail, he admits he has only heard rumors of the meadow from a traveler who once met someone who vaguely remembered it from childhood. Still, the others nod approvingly, impressed by the meadow's potential, even if its location shifts every time they redraw the map. One man buys several acres immediately, claiming he can already picture his future estate, complete with orchards and a grand porch from which he will someday survey land that may or may not be swamp. Outside, speculators set up stalls along the street, each shouting over the others while waving deeds at passers-by. A man in a fine coat insists he is selling riverfront property along a river he mispronounces so confidently that no one questions it. Another offers a parcel on a mountain ridge, though he admits under his breath that he has only seen the ridge drawn on a map imported from Europe, where cartographers filled blank spaces with whatever sounded impressive. Buyers gather around, dazzled by possibility rather than accuracy. You sense they are less interested in facts and more enchanted by the idea that wealth might spring from the wilderness like a miracle. You wander to a quieter stall, where an older speculator sorts through deeds with the weary air of a man who has personally sold half of the continent without stepping foot on it. He explains that land is an idea before it becomes a place, and ideas, fortunately, are easy to package. He shows you a deed for a town site he named himself, a name so tangled with vowels you suspect he invented it during a coughing fit. He assures you the town will thrive someday, just as soon as someone finds a route through the mountains that are, admittedly, taller than expected. Buyers take his assurances with good humor, as if joining a communal adventure rather than negotiating real estate. Nearby, two speculators argue over who owns the right to sell a valley neither can locate on their maps. One insists the valley is west of a certain river, the other believes it is south of a certain hill. A third man listening in suggests the valley might be north, which sparks a new argument so animated you fear they may redraw the entire continent just to settle it. They debate the valley's shape, climate, and potential future architectural style, as though constructing a fantasy rather than trying to describe actual terrain. As the day wears on, a buyer approaches with earnest questions. He asks about soil quality, weather, and access to water. The speculators exchange nervous glances, unprepared for such realism. One clears his throat and announces that the land enjoys mild breezes because mild breezes sound reassuring. Another claims the soil is dark and rich because he has decided it should be. The buyer nods slowly, absorbing this imaginative confidence, then purchases a deed as if buying into a dream rather than a plot of earth. Evening approaches and lanterns flicker to life, casting warm light across the chaotic maps. The speculators gather for celebratory drinks, clinking glasses over land they have never visited, praising each other's creativity and describing territories that shift with every retelling. They speak of fortunes waiting just beyond the horizon, unaware or unconcerned that the horizon is drawn by their own hands. You sit among them, listening to their laughter, sensing that in this early chapter of the nation, exploration begins not with footsteps but with confidence, parchment, and the bold willingness to sell a world still half imagined. You step into the first American banks expecting polished counters, calm clerks, and ledgers written with mathematical certainty. Instead, you find a room filled with the hopeful chaos of people pretending they understand money while quietly praying no one asks follow-up questions. The air smells of ink, ambition, and mild panic. Clerks shuffle papers with the urgency of men trying to organize their thoughts through sheer movement. A banker stands behind a counter giving a speech about financial stability, though he whispers to his assistant between sentences, asking how interest actually works. You edge closer as customers push forward, clutching coins and handwritten notes they call deposits. One man insists he wants to open an account for future generations. Though he cannot define what an account is beyond a locked box, he assumes the bank keeps in a trustworthy corner. A banker nods sagely, taking the man's deposit and scribbling something in a ledger that looks suspiciously like a doodle. Another customer demands a loan to expand his farm, unaware the banker has already loaned out more money than the bank physically holds. The banker approves the loan with such confidence that you briefly wonder if confidence alone is accepted as collateral. You wander toward a side table where three men argue about currency. One holds a stack of banknotes printed locally. Another clutches notes from a different state. A third insists gold is the only real form of money and refuses to acknowledge paper at all. They debate value, trust, and exchange rates with the intensity of philosophers. Though their arguments drift so wildly, you suspect none of them fully grasps the system they are defending. Someone suggests creating a national standard. Someone else suggests allowing every bank to print its own notes because variety builds character. The table erupts into a small storm of opinions, none of which seem likely to solve anything. Behind them, a banker counts coins with theatrical precision, stacking them in neat towers that wobble every time someone walks too close. When a tower collapses, the banker sighs, mutters something about economic volatility, and starts again. His assistant sits nearby, designing new banknotes with flourishes, eagles, and bold statements about trustworthiness. He explains proudly that notes look more legitimate when decorated with animals, though he has not decided whether bears or geese symbolize financial strength more effectively. In the corner, a nervous man arrives to withdraw his savings because he has heard rumors that banks sometimes loan out deposits. He asks for reassurance. The banker smiles, places a comforting hand on his shoulder, and assures him everything is under control, though his smile twitches when the man asks for specifics. While the banker rummages through drawers, it becomes clear the bank has lent out half the man's savings to a merchant currently 3 towns away. The banker produces what he can and offers the rest as a promissory note written in elegant script, as if beauty will distract from uncertainty. You step outside with a group of citizens gathered near the entrance, discussing the rumors of bank failures in other towns. One man claims he heard a bank imploded because the owner invested everything in a canal that dried up. Another says a different bank collapsed when its accountant misplaced every ledger during a house move. The group reacts with resigned shrugs rather than alarm, convinced this is simply the nature of modern finance. They speak of trust as a fragile rope holding everything together, frayed but still intact. Back inside, a young banker delivers an impassioned speech about the future of American finance. He insists that banks will unite the nation, build prosperity, and create opportunity for all. His enthusiasm fills the room, stirring hope, even though moments earlier he asked a colleague whether subtracting small sums from large ones is best done mentally or in a separate column. The crowd applauds anyway, swept up in the vision of a financial system where confidence matters as much as competence. By late afternoon, the bank closes its doors. Clerks gather around the counter, examining ledgers with expressions that blend pride and confusion. They debate whether the numbers reflect success or simply survival. Outside, people walk away believing they have participated in something important, something foundational, something promising, even if no one could explain exactly how it works. As the lamps dim and the last coins clink into drawers, you realize that American banking was not born from certainty. It emerged from trial, error, hope, and the audacity of people who believed a nation could build wealth before fully understanding money. The system wobbles like a stack of unstable coins, yet somehow it holds, buoyed by faith, ambition, and the steady conviction that tomorrow it will make more sense than today. You step into a dusty crossroads town just as a crowd gathers around a man who claims to have single-handedly tamed a wild river. He stands on a barrel, chest puffed, voice booming, describing how the river thrashed and hissed until he glared at it with such authority that it changed course out of respect. The onlookers gasp. Never mind that the river sits a mile away and has not shifted an inch in decades. Details do not matter here. You realize quickly that this is a place where stories outrun reality with the enthusiasm of hounds chasing a hare. As you wander farther, you encounter a blacksmith polishing his tools with exaggerated ceremony. He swears he once forged a horseshoe so perfectly balanced that the horse wearing it ran straight uphill for an entire afternoon without tiring. When you raise an eyebrow, he adds that the hill was extremely steep, the steepest in the territory, almost vertical. Someone nearby mutters that the blacksmith's famous hill is actually a gentle rise behind the mill, but no one corrects him aloud. In this era, facts step aside for the pleasure of a good tale. At a nearby tavern, patrons trade stories with the intensity of merchants comparing treasures. One man boasts that he can split a tree in half with a single swing of his axe. Another claims he once outran a tornado, kept pace with it for several minutes, then politely asked it to move along. The storyteller slams his mug down for emphasis, and the room nods in admiration, though someone quietly points out that he was inside during the last tornado and fainted before it even arrived. The correction is ignored. Why acknowledge truth when exaggeration builds far better community spirit? Outside, you meet a wiry tracker whose legend has traveled across half the continent. He speaks softly, almost shyly, yet the townsfolk insist he can follow footprints across rocky ground and identify a man's dinner from the way he steps. You watch him kneel in the dirt, squinting at a single scuff mark. After several minutes, he announces with gentle certainty that he sees evidence of a traveler carrying heavy sorrow and 3 bags of flour. Then he stands and confesses privately that he has no idea what he is looking at, but the expectations of others keep his imagination sharp. You walk toward the edge of town where a towering woodsman sharpens his axe under the shade of a cottonwood. Stories paint him as a giant capable of felling forests with a yawn, but in person he is merely tall, with hands rough from honest work. Still, when children gather to hear his tales, he straightens, adjusts his stance, and begins describing how he once chopped through 100 trees in the time it takes to boil water. The children squeal with delight. He glances at you briefly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes, as though acknowledging that sometimes greatness is shaped by storytelling more than action. A young woman in a bright shawl approaches next, known locally for her unmatched skill in horse riding. She regales listeners with stories of racing across the plains so swiftly the wind struggled to keep up. In reality, her horse is fast but mortal, and she is skilled but human. Yet you watch her ride later, hair streaming, posture fearless, and you understand how a community transforms admiration into myth. She may not have outrun the wind, but she carries herself as if she might someday, and perhaps that is enough. Night falls, lanterns flicker to life, and the town gathers for another round of communal storytelling. Men and women sit on porches, around fires, and along fence rails, weaving increasingly elaborate narratives about themselves and each other. Someone describes fighting a bear twice his size. Another claims she caught a fish so enormous it pulled her canoe upstream. The tales merge into a warm, rhythmic murmur that fills the air like shared heartbeat. You realize these folk heroes are born not from extraordinary feats, but from the yearning of people to see a little magic in their neighbors. Hard lives become easier when wrapped in wonder. Ordinary skills become legendary when polished with pride. These stories are not meant to deceive, but to comfort, inspire, and bind communities together through shared imagination. You listen as one final tale rises into the night, a story so improbable the stars themselves seem to lean closer, and you understand that in this era, truth grows slowly, but legends grow wherever they are welcomed, flourishing in the wide open spaces of hope and restless frontier dreams. You find yourself in a small state house where lawmakers bustle about with the purposeful stride of people convinced they are safeguarding the republic from dangers that have not yet introduced themselves. The room hums with ambition, quills scratching furiously, voices rising as men argue over categories of misbehavior that sound less like legal concerns and more like inconveniences they personally endured last week. A legislator stands at the center holding a parchment he treats with ceremonial reverence, announcing that he has devised a new crime called unauthorized loafing, which he defines as standing around in a way that feels suspicious. The room murmurs approvingly, unaware that half of them are currently loafing. Another representative rises to propose a law against improper wagon enthusiasm, insisting that cheering too loudly at passing wagons disrupts the peace. He cites a dramatic incident where a man shouted encouragement at a wagon carrying turnips, startling a nearby horse. The horse had reportedly twitched. "This," he says, "must never happen again." The assembly nods gravely and begins discussing punishment tiers, ranging from stern lectures to mandatory reflection time near the quiet pond. You drift closer as one lawmaker unveils his latest achievement, a statute banning competitive stair climbing. He claims that too many citizens rush up public steps trying to outpace their neighbors, creating unnecessary rivalry. When someone asks how many stair climbing incidents have occurred, he responds proudly that none have occurred since he announced his intention to outlaw them. The room erupts in applause, celebrating his success in preventing an issue no one considered until now. At a long table, a committee debates the growing crisis of unregulated whittling. One man fears that citizens carving sticks into whimsical shapes might lead to moral decay. Another insists that only certified whittlers should be allowed to produce spirals and decorative twists. A third worries that regulating whittling will require constant supervision, which could overwhelm the justice system. They argue until someone proposes a licensing exam involving both carving skill and upright character. No one can define upright character, but they all agree it sounds impressive. You step into a side chamber where a smaller group huddles around a stack of proposals. These lawmakers have discovered the joy of solving problems by inventing them first. One proudly reveals a new offense called excessive twilight loitering, designed to prevent people from lingering outdoors at dusk with ambiguous intentions. Another suggests outlawing aggressive pie cooling, explaining that placing pies on windowsills too confidently invites envy and competition between neighbors. They scribble amendments with the seriousness of men drafting emergency legislation, even though their greatest concern appears to be social awkwardness. Outside the chamber, a representative broadcasts his accomplishments to a gathering crowd. He boasts that since he criminalized unauthorized humming during civic events, humming incidents have dropped to zero. When a citizen timidly asks if humming had ever been an issue, he waves the question away, emphasizing that preemptive action is the key to good governance. Another lawmaker arrives to announce that his initiative against barrel rolling has been tremendously successful. The fact that no one had rolled a barrel in living memory only strengthens his conviction that the law is working. Back inside, debates continue over additional crimes. Someone suggests penalizing unsanctioned decorative landscaping. Another proposes restrictions on the emotional tone of public announcements. A third warns that unless they regulate the timing of rooster crowing, morning tranquility may collapse entirely. The lawmakers nod gravely, grateful to address such pressing matters before the public discovers they are not addressing much at all. As afternoon light fades, the lawmakers gather to review their achievements. They congratulate each other on the disappearance of crimes that never existed, the prevention of troubles no one anticipated, and the maintenance of order through an ever-expanding collection of oddly specific regulations. They speak with satisfaction, convinced they have trimmed chaos from the edges of society with the careful dedication of gardeners pruning imaginary vines. You leave the State House as lamps glow along the street, listening to citizens go about their lives blissfully unaware of the many dangers that have been legally defined and immediately conquered. Behind you, lawmakers continue crafting new offenses with cheerful zeal, ready to boast tomorrow about reducing them. And you realize that in this peculiar period of the nation's growth, governance sometimes thrives not on actual threats, but on the comforting illusion of victory over problems the lawmakers conjure purely for the pleasure of solving. You arrive at a clearing in the woods just as a crowd surges toward a makeshift stage built from uneven planks and optimism. Someone rings a bell to announce the beginning of the revival, though the bell sounds more like a tin cup being thrown down a staircase. People hush each other with the excitement of spectators awaiting a grand spectacle, because in these gatherings, salvation and entertainment often share the same seat. The air buzzes with dust, murmurs, and the hopeful tension of an audience ready to be transformed by whatever unfolds under the open sky. A preacher bursts onto the stage with the enthusiasm of a man who believes heaven grades on energy alone. His voice booms with such force that birds scatter from nearby branches. He gestures dramatically, sweeping his arms as though trying to embrace the entire forest, and declares that everyone present is standing on sacred ground. The crowd gasps, even though the ground is clearly the same dirt they trampled last week during a picnic. It does not matter. In this moment, the preacher's conviction outweighs geography. You notice the acoustics immediately. Every time the preacher shouts, his words bounce off trees, ricochet through the crowd, and return in echoes that sound like his spiritual twin arguing with him 2 beats behind. He does not seem bothered by this. If anything, he appears delighted, as if believing the echoes are proof that the angels agree with him. When he leans in to whisper a solemn truth, the murmur drifts away on the breeze and dissolves entirely, prompting him to shout again, because shouting, at least, guarantees someone hears something. As he preaches, several assistants mill around the crowd to amplify excitement. One waves a handkerchief overhead and proclaims that miracles are best captured on fabric. Another encourages the audience to feel the Spirit moving through them, though the Spirit appears to move inconsistently, affecting only those seated closest to the stage. People sway, cheer, and raise their hands at uneven intervals, creating a pattern that looks choreographed by someone who forgot half the steps. A woman behind you begins weeping loudly, though you cannot tell whether she is overcome by emotion or simply overwhelmed by the preacher's voice. A man to your left starts nodding vigorously, then collapses onto his knees as if struck by revelation. When he stands again, he admits he mostly crouched because his legs fell asleep, but the crowd interprets it as divine intervention. Several others follow his example, dropping to the ground with the timing of people unsure whether they are reenacting a spiritual gesture or participating in a spontaneous group exercise. Midway through the revival, the preacher switches gears and begins describing visions he claims came to him in dreams. He recounts scenes so vivid and peculiar that you suspect his dreams are fueled by heavy suppers. He describes fiery chariots, singing trout, and a ladder made of moonlight. The crowd leans in, enthralled, though half of them cannot hear the details over the echo that transforms trout into something sounding like drought, which shifts their entire understanding of the message. None of this dampens their enthusiasm. They simply cheer at whatever words survive the breeze. A small choir attempts to join the sermon with hymns that should be familiar, but somehow drift off key, tempo, and occasionally melody. The preacher welcomes the musical chaos with open arms and louder proclamations. At one point, he tries to sing along, though his voice overwhelms the choir and transforms the hymn into something resembling a rallying chant. The audience pretends not to notice and sings with gusto, creating a soundscape that feels more earnest than harmonious. As the revival reaches its peak, people begin testifying. One man claims he felt a warmth in his chest that he interprets as blessing. Another swears he saw a flicker of light at the corner of his vision. A third says he heard the voice of the divine, though it may have been the echo again. The preacher seizes upon each testimony as proof that the gathering is working, that the Spirit is moving, that the acoustics are indeed a vessel of holy amplification. By dusk, the crowd glows with feverish unity. The preacher closes the revival with a triumphant shout that fades into a cascade of echoes, each softer, stranger, and more distant until it dissolves entirely. People leave the clearing with uplifted expressions, convinced they have witnessed something extraordinary, even if half the message was shaped by wind and wooden planks that carried sound poorly. You walk among them as fireflies blink into the evening, sensing that in these revivals, faith thrives not through clarity, but through collective yearning, bound together by noise, passion, and the shared belief that meaning will reveal itself somewhere between the echoes. You wander into a bustling town square where vendors shout over one another with the confidence of men who have never doubted a single thought that crossed their minds. Wooden carts are draped in banners proclaiming miracle tonics that claim to cure exhaustion, melancholy, tooth pain, hair loss, and in one ambitious case, general disappointment with life. The air smells of roasted nuts, dust, and the faint sting of alcohol disguised as medicine. You pause beside a stall where a salesman with a magnificent mustache waves a bottle filled with a liquid the color of troubled river water. He declares that one sip will sharpen the mind, invigorate the body, and possibly improve posture if taken before breakfast. A woman asks what is in the tonic. The salesman beams proudly and rattles off ingredients with the speed of a magician performing a trick. You catch words like invigorating essences and botanical fortifications, though none of them resemble anything you have ever seen growing in nature. When she presses him for specifics, he leans closer and insists that true healing must remain mysterious, or it loses potency. The woman nods as if this is profound wisdom and buys 2 bottles. You drift to another cart where a man in a velvet coat claims he has discovered the secret to eternal youth. He lifts a vial filled with shimmering liquid and explains that it should be taken in small doses to avoid inconvenient side effects like temporary dizziness or complete confusion. A crowd gathers as he demonstrates by taking a sip himself, then wobbling slightly. He assures everyone that the wobble indicates the elixir is working. A bystander whispers that the last batch caused a man to fall asleep in a public fountain, but the crowd remains mesmerized, drawn in by the allure of promises too dazzling to question. Nearby, a traveling doctor advertises a potion extracted from rare roots he claims grow only in the mountains. He gestures at a stack of bottles arranged like trophies and recites its benefits with the smooth rhythm of a well-practiced chant. As he speaks, his assistant hands out samples, urging people to take a cautious sip. Several villagers do, making polite noises of approval even as their faces twist at the taste. One swallows hard and insists she feels lighter already. Another claims his eyesight has sharpened, though he is still squinting at the label. Farther down the lane, a tonic peddler has attracted a crowd by promising to cure ailments no one has ever heard of. He announces he can eliminate wandering leg, reverse internal gloom, and stabilize unsettled limbs. He even offers a tonic to prevent spontaneous misfortune, which sells quickly because no one wishes to take chances. When asked how he discovered these cures, he explains he once followed a dream into a forest and received wisdom from a talking squirrel. The crowd accepts this as a charming origin story rather than a reason for alarm. You pause at a quieter stall where an older woman sells remedies brewed from herbs she gathered herself. Her tonics smell earthy and familiar, and she offers them without grand promises. She simply tells customers they may help, or they may not, but at least they will not harm. Few people stop here. They prefer the potions that glow unnaturally or fizz when uncorked. Even in the realm of healing, spectacle wins. At the center of the square, a man with a portable stage performs demonstrations of his miracle cure. He invites volunteers from the audience and asks them to describe their ailments. One man claims to suffer from persistent gloominess. The salesman hands him a bottle, and after a dramatic swallow, the volunteer throws his arms in the air and declares himself renewed. The crowd roars with approval. Moments later, you overhear him whispering to his wife that he mostly raised his arms because the salesman asked him to. As dusk settles, torches flicker, and the salesmen shout louder, eager to secure last-minute purchases. People hurry home with bottles clinking in their baskets, filled with hope that these strange concoctions might ease their burdens. You sense the mixture of optimism and desperation swirling through the town, a willingness to believe in anything that promises relief, even if relief comes with glowing liquids, unpronounceable ingredients, or advice shouted by men standing on boxes. You watch the square empty by lantern light and realize this age of quackery thrives not because the tonics work, but because they answer a longing deeper than science. People want certainty, healing, and wonder, even when wrapped in questionable mixtures. They trust the confidence of salesmen who speak loudly and smile widely, believing that anyone who shines so brightly must carry truth. You leave the market as the last vendor packs his bottles, aware that these miracle cures offer everything except safety, yet still capture hearts with the simple promise that suffering might be eased by a sip of hope. You step into a military encampment expecting discipline, precision, and officers who speak in firm, authoritative tones. Instead, you find a field scattered with contraptions that look like the inventions of clever children given far too much rope and encouragement. Soldiers bustle around a giant balloon tethered to the ground, its striped canvas swelling as men pump air into it with the hopeful exhaustion of people who believe the future of warfare involves floating gently above the battlefield. One officer paces beneath it, explaining to anyone who will listen that elevation is the key to victory, though he admits he has not figured out how to keep the balloon from drifting wherever the wind feels mischievous. Nearby, a team of soldiers attempts to steer the balloon's basket using long poles. They jab at the air with the solemnity of men rowing an invisible river. When the balloon shifts slightly, they cheer as though mastering flight itself. Moments later, a gust of wind sends the balloon lurching sideways, dragging 3 soldiers across the dirt, while the officer shouts instructions the wind willfully ignores. Eventually the balloon calms, and the soldiers dust themselves off, insisting they nearly had it that time. You wander toward a cluster of cannons arranged in a line, each accompanied by soldiers who appear unsure whether their tasks are heroic or hazardous. One cannon has been reinforced with wooden planks they claim will keep it from shaking too violently. Another has been polished so aggressively the sun reflecting off it blinds half the crew. A third cannon is whispered about with fearful reverence. Its last attempt at firing resulted in it rolling backward, flattening a tent, and frightening a mule into running off with someone's laundry. Despite this history, the soldiers prepare it once more, tapping it tenderly as though soothing a temperamental animal. When they fire, the cannon emits a low, disgruntled boom and launches a projectile in a direction no one intended. Men scramble to track its path, shading their eyes and speculating about where it might land. One claims it soared into the treetops. Another insists it went straight up and has not yet decided to come down. They argue until a distant thud echoes across the hills. The crew nods respectfully, proud that at least the cannon fired in some direction, which counts as progress. Beyond the artillery field, you encounter a man unveiling his newest experiment, a wagon fitted with collapsible wings. He insists the wagon can catch air currents, glide gracefully, and give commanders an aerial view of enemy positions. The soldiers listen politely as he explains the physics, though their faces reveal doubts. When he demonstrates by pushing the wagon downhill, it travels a short distance, flaps its wings half-heartedly, and tips over with a sighing creak. The inventor claps his hands and declares the test a promising beginning. The soldiers help him upright the wagon, offering quiet sympathy to its dented frame. A group of officers gather around a map, discussing strategies that rely heavily on imagination and favorable weather. One suggests attaching lanterns to balloons to confuse the enemy at night. Another proposes setting the cannons at unusual angles to keep opponents guessing. A third suggests launching messages by tying them to pigeons, though no one knows how to train pigeons beyond hoping they fly in the right direction. The officers nod with weary optimism, each believing that innovation often looks absurd before it becomes brilliant. As afternoon stretches on, the balloon crew resumes their efforts. They manage to lift a scout a few feet off the ground before the balloon begins drifting toward a stand of trees. Soldiers grab the ropes and chase after it, shouting encouragement and concern. The scout in the basket waves uncertainly, his voice wobbling with the balloon as he calls out observations like a man sightseeing rather than preparing for war. Eventually, the balloon dips low enough for the crew to pull it down, and everyone cheers the landing, relieved that it involved neither tree nor unexpected travel. You end your visit watching soldiers repair their experimental devices with the gentle patience of tinkerers who believe solutions always lurk just one adjustment away. They tighten bolts, reinforce beams, sketch revisions, and discuss tomorrow's trials with the cheerful determination of dreamers undeterred by physics. Their optimism is contagious, a reminder that progress often grows from failed attempts, confusion, and the stubborn refusal to give up on ideas that wobble, drift, or occasionally explode. As the sun dips beneath the horizon, the camp glows with lantern light and improbable hope. You realize these strange experiments reveal more than ingenuity. They reveal a military trying to stretch the boundaries of possibility, powered not by flawless strategy, but by the faith that somewhere amid the balloons and unreliable cannons lies the spark of something bold enough to change the future. You follow a group of explorers trudging westward with the determined posture of men who refuse to admit their confidence is based entirely on maps drawn by people who never set foot beyond familiar farmland. Their maps flap in the wind like nervous birds, corners curling, ink fading, rivers bending in ways that suggest either artistic flair or deep misunderstanding. One explorer studies the map intently, tracing a squiggled line labeled possibly river or canyon. He nods with satisfaction, as though ambiguity is a sign of thoroughness. Another points at a mountain symbol that looks suspiciously like a doodle someone drew during a long meeting. He insists they will reach it by nightfall, even though no one sees so much as a hill. The explorers march forward with cheerful optimism. Every time the terrain contradicts the map, they gather in a huddle, tilt their heads, and conclude that the land must have shifted since the mapmaker's era. They whisper theories about earthquakes and dramatic floods, unwilling to entertain the simpler explanation that their mapmaker just guessed. When the trail vanishes completely, they declare they have discovered a new path. When they wander into a thicket so dense it looks untouched by human intention, they congratulate themselves on reaching unexplored territory, completely ignoring the fresh deer tracks beneath their boots. You watch as the leader points at a blank patch of parchment and declares it promising. The others nod, pretending blankness is a cartographic strategy rather than an omission. They stride toward the horizon with a confidence that grows stronger the less certain they become. When the sun climbs overhead, they argue about their location. One insists they are right where the map says they should be. Another points out that the map does not indicate any of the features they see around them. A third suggests they may be reading the map upside down. They test this theory by rotating the parchment several times until the directions feel spiritually correct. At midday, they stop to rest beside a creek that does not appear on their map. Instead of treating this as a warning, they treat it as an opportunity to improve the map themselves. They sketch the creek with enthusiastic strokes, adding flourishes that make it look far more dramatic than reality. One man suggests naming it after himself. Another argues for a name that honors the expedition. They compromise by giving it a name no one will remember, and then immediately debating whether the creek flows north or philosophically north. Later, the explorers encounter a range of hills that contradict every expectation their map has given them. The map shows one mountain standing proudly alone. Before them, however, are many hills, none of which seem particularly proud. The leader squints and decides that the hills must be the mountains seen from a distance. When no one accepts this, he changes tactics and claims the map is symbolic rather than literal. The group agrees this is a reasonable explanation for the fact that the terrain stubbornly refuses to cooperate. You walk with them through forests where the trees whisper in ways no cartographer has attempted to capture. They wade through tall grass that hides holes, insects, and the occasional startled rabbit. One explorer suggests drawing the grass on the map. Another reminds him that grass moves, making it an unreliable feature. They compromise by drawing a small patch and labeling the rest unpredictable. Evenings bring renewed confidence. Around the fire, the explorers brag about their progress, tallying discoveries, embellishing their hardships just enough to make them sound noble. Someone claims they crossed a perilous ravine, though you recall stepping over what was essentially an enthusiastic ditch. Another claims they followed a trail used by ancient travelers, though evidence suggests it was merely a path worn by a very determined cow. The stories warm their spirits more than the fire. As night deepens, they consult the map once more, turning it this way and that, each angle offering a new interpretation. They debate whether a smudge is a lake, a marking, or a stain from someone's lunch. They choose lake because it makes the journey feel more meaningful. You watch the flames flicker across their faces, illuminating their blend of ambition, uncertainty, and stubborn hope. In the end, you realize these explorers are propelled not by accurate maps, but by an eagerness to push beyond the known. Their confidence thrives in the gaps between truth and imagination. They are guided by curiosity, improvisation, and the unwavering belief that heading west, even with misguided maps, still leads somewhere worth discovering. You step into a gold rush town expecting at least a hint of order, but the moment your boots hit the dust, you realize the place operates on pure, undiluted chaos. Buildings lean at suspicious angles, as if constructed by people too excited to measure anything. Tents spill across the hillsides like fabric thrown by a restless giant. Every direction brims with motion, shouting, and clattering, as though the entire town is trying to express 12 different emotions at once. You pass a sign reading "Welcome to Fortune," though half the letters are crooked, which feels appropriate for a place held together by adrenaline and wishful thinking. Prospectors swarm the streets with pans in hand, rushing from one rumor to the next. One man shouts that gold has been found in the creek. Another insists the real gold lies in the hills. A third claims gold dust drifted into his soup last night. None of them attempt to verify anything before sprinting off toward the latest promise of riches. You watch as a group of men scramble toward the river, trip over each other, and plunge into the water with the grace of startled cattle. Moments later, they argue about who disturbed whose perfect concentration, even though none of them have managed a single pan swirl yet. Saloons crowd the main street, their doors swinging endlessly as miners rush in and out with pockets full or empty, depending on the hour. Piano music competes with shouting, laughter, and occasional brawls that break out not from anger but from enthusiasm. You step inside one saloon long enough to witness a heated argument about the proper technique for finding gold. One man swears success lies in patience. Another argues it lies in instinct. A third says luck is purchased at the bar. They toast to their differences and go back to debating methods none of them have mastered. Outside, merchants hawk tools with the desperation of people who know the real gold is sitting in their crates. One sells pans guaranteed to reveal treasure. Another offers lucky shovels blessed by a man who appears to have blessed several hundred that morning. Someone advertises miracle dirt repellent boots, though the boots already look defeated by dust. Buyers snatch up supplies anyway, not because they trust the merchandise, but because in this town, buying equipment feels like participating in destiny. Along the edge of the camp, makeshift businesses spring up with the creativity of people who realize anything can be monetized if shouted loudly enough. A man offers gold-finding lessons for a generous fee, despite having found no gold himself. Another sells maps that promise secret locations, though each map looks suspiciously identical. A woman sets up a booth offering encouraging words for a small price. Her booth has the longest line of all. You wander to the riverbank, where prospectors dig with frantic devotion. They shovel dirt, sift it, fling it aside, then repeat the process with religious fervor. Every few minutes someone yells, "I see something." The crowd surges around them. Then they squint, sigh, and declare it was just a shiny rock pretending to be gold. No one seems discouraged. If anything, the disappointment fuels them, convincing them that success must be inches away. The determination is relentless, a kind of fever shared openly and proudly. Farther up the trail, a cluster of miners constructs a new settlement area. They hammer boards together with such haste that the buildings look like they are bracing for impact. Every structure serves multiple purposes because no one has time to define anything clearly. A restaurant doubles as a courtroom. A supply shop doubles as a stage. A tent hosts sermons in the morning and card games in the afternoon. You watch a preacher finish a stirring message about virtue, then immediately sit down to play a round of cards, insisting it builds fellowship. As evening falls, lanterns flicker across the town, and the chaotic energy settles into something almost warm. People gather around fires, telling exaggerated stories about the gold they will surely find tomorrow. One man claims he felt gold beneath his feet. Another swears he heard gold whispering to him. A third says gold appeared in a dream and promised to reveal itself soon. No one questions the logic because hope is the closest thing this town has to law. You sit among them, listening to the crackle of flames and the clinking of pans still being cleaned long after daylight has faded. The chaos no longer feels threatening. It feels intentional, as if the town survives not despite disorder but because of it. In this place, chaos is the currency. It drives ambition, fuels dreams, and keeps people chasing after something that may or may not exist just beyond the next bend in the river. And you realize that gold rush towns are not built on gold. They are built on the unstoppable momentum of people who believe fortune is waiting for them, even if fortune keeps moving. You arrive in a small town just as it prepares for its annual celebration of something called Lantern Hog Day, a holiday so cherished that no one can explain its origin without contradicting someone else in the room. The townsfolk bustle about with cheerful determination, hanging paper lanterns shaped vaguely like hogs, though most resemble lopsided pumpkins with ears. A committee of elders debates whether the hog in the original legend carried a lantern to guide travelers or swallowed a lantern during an unfortunate supper. They settle on both explanations, deciding that mystery adds charm. Children run through the streets wearing handmade costumes while adults rehearse the ceremonial hog call, a sound that falls somewhere between a cheer and a startled yelp. You watch as an elder clears his throat and announces that the call must be performed precisely at twilight for reasons he cannot remember. Someone suggests consulting the town records, but the records consist of a single page written in shaky handwriting that simply states important hog things. The crowd nods with approval, satisfied that tradition has been honored. As you wander the decorated streets, you pass a bakery offering pastries shaped like mythical creatures supposedly tied to the holiday's origin story. One pastry resembles a boar carrying a lantern. Another looks like a lantern carrying a boar. A third looks like the baker fell asleep while glazing. Customers buy them anyway, delighted to participate in a tradition whose details shift yearly. You overhear someone explain to a visitor that the holiday originated when a brave hog saved the town from winter darkness. Another insists it began when settlers mistook glowing mushrooms for hog eyes. A third claims the hog was actually a wise spirit sent to teach humility. No one seems bothered by the inconsistency. The story, they say, grows with the town. At the town square, preparations intensify for the evening pageant. A group of performers practice reenacting the legend, though disagreements stall progress. One actor believes the hog should speak in riddles. Another thinks the hog should sing. The director announces that the hog must leap heroically across the stage, even though the man playing the hog has very limited leaping ability. They rehearse anyway, resulting in a slow hop that the director insists captures the spirit of the tale. Spectators applaud, not for accuracy, but for enthusiasm. You drift toward a tent displaying artifacts supposedly linked to the legendary hog. One exhibit features a lantern said to be the original, though its construction suggests it was made only 10 years ago by someone with a fondness for decorative nails. Another display contains a patch of dirt labeled sacred ground, though no one knows why it is sacred or whether this patch is the correct one. A curator cheerfully explains that the purpose of the exhibit is not certainty but celebration, and you begin to understand how myth can flourish when facts are optional. As twilight nears, the town gathers beneath strings of flickering lanterns. The air fills with anticipation. Elders step onto a platform to retell the legend, each taking turns embellishing the tale until it resembles a collaboration between poets and enthusiastic liars. They describe the hog glowing like dawn, guiding lost settlers through a storm of unimaginable size. They describe bravery, wisdom, and surprisingly effective hoofwork. The crowd listens, enthralled, though many people nod as if hearing this for the first time. Then comes the ceremonial hog call. The entire town inhales at once, then releases a sound so peculiar you cannot categorize it. It echoes off the hills, startling birds and confusing nearby livestock. The elders declare the call successful and proceed to light the lanterns. One by one, tiny flames flicker to life, casting warm light across the square. Children cheer. Adults sway with nostalgic pride. No one questions why the ritual matters. It matters because they have decided it does. After the lanterns glow brightly, the pageant begins. The actor playing the hog shuffles onto the stage, glowing from lantern light, delivering his lines with earnest conviction. The crowd applauds before he even speaks. The performance is clumsy, charming, and entirely devoted to honoring a story that may never have existed. When the hog delivers his final heroic hop, the audience erupts in applause, so heartfelt you feel the legend deepen in real time. As night settles, people wander home with lanterns swinging in gentle arcs. You realize these small towns do not create holidays to preserve history. They create them to preserve identity, belonging, and the comforting idea that magic once brushed their lives. Whether the hog existed, whether it carried a lantern or swallowed one, whether the legend is centuries old or invented last generation does not matter. They celebrate because celebration keeps the story alive. And in the warm glow of flickering lanterns, you see how a myth, unburdened by fact, can become the heartbeat of a community. You find yourself drifting into a dusty frontier settlement where the air tastes faintly of gunpowder, ambition, and whatever stew is bubbling in the pot behind the saloon. A crowd gathers near the general store, whispering in tones that wobble between awe and disbelief. They speak the name of a local outlaw as though he is both a menace and a minor miracle. A man who once robbed the same bank twice in one afternoon because he did not like how the teller looked at him. Someone claims he can shoot the wings off a fly. Another insists he cannot hit the broadside of a barn, but makes up for it with theatrical flair. You realize quickly that none of these stories are useful for forming a coherent picture of the man, but that seems to be the point. Posters nailed to nearby walls paint him with a jawline so sharp it could cut rope and eyes glowing like a desert sunrise. Though the only first-hand witness describes him as average in both build and hygiene, facts dissolve as easily as dust in wind, replaced by tales that grow every time someone retells them. Even the people who dislike him speak with a reluctant admiration, as if he represents a freedom they want, but do not trust themselves to handle. One woman swears he once rode into town atop a stolen stagecoach while juggling stolen coins. A man beside her refutes the story, explaining that he was definitely riding a mule, though the mule reportedly stole the coins. You wander to the edge of town where a group of young men practice imitating their idol. They twist their hats at the same jaunty angle they imagine he wears and rehearse mysterious stares that are meant to convey danger, but mostly convey constipation. A boy barely old enough to shave boasts that he will join the outlaws' gang someday. Another vows he will bring the outlaw to justice, so he too can become famous. The irony that both paths rely on the outlaw's continued existence seems lost on them. Across the street, a newspaper editor sits hunched over his desk, inventing fresh details to spice up tomorrow's article. He taps his pen, debating whether the outlaw leapt 30 feet between rooftops or 40. 30 feels believable. 40 sells more papers. He settles on 50, deciding readers deserve ambition. It becomes clear that outlaw fame is no accident. It is a collaboration between boredom, imagination, and people who need something exciting to talk about. Even now, the editor mutters the outlaw's name as if it is a melody he is determined to perfect. A stagecoach arrives, and passengers step off with eager faces, expecting to glimpse the legendary figure who turns this ordinary settlement into a stage for heroic misbehavior. One tourist asks if there is a museum dedicated to the outlaw. The townsfolk exchange glances. Someone suggests the saloon counts, since he once carved his initials into a bar stool. They gesture proudly to the wobbly stool inside, where a scratched letter might be an O or a Q or just a sloppy accident, but the tourists lean in reverently anyway. You move through the saloon where the bartender wipes glasses with the solemnity of a priest preparing for ritual. He tells a story about the outlaw playing poker with 3 sheriffs and walking away with their badges. A man nearby insists the outlaw never gambles because cards make him emotional. Their arguments escalate until you suspect they may be describing 2 different people entirely, but this does not bother them. The myth is the entertainment. Accuracy is optional. Late in the evening, a rider gallops into town announcing that the outlaw was spotted miles away. People cheer as if this is good news. The blacksmith pumps his fist. Children bounce excitedly. Even the sheriff, who should logically be distressed, mutters something that sounds suspiciously like admiration. You begin to understand that the outlaw is less a criminal and more a mascot for their collective yearning, a symbol of rebellion wrapped in an aura of impossible charm. As lanterns glow and the crowd drifts home, the stories continue in softer tones. Each tale grows bolder, stranger, and more unmoored from reality. You realize you will never know the true man behind the legend, because the legend is the point. It thrives precisely because it refuses to be pinned down. The outlaw is a reflection of everything these people want to believe about courage, danger, and a life unrestrained by rules. By the time the night settles, the myth has grown again, swelling like a campfire fed by too many hands. And somewhere out in the dark, a perfectly ordinary man rides through the wilderness, unaware that he has become larger than life, an accidental hero sculpted by a town hungry for wonder. You wander into a brick hall on the edge of a bustling 19th century town, drawn by the sound of enthusiastic chanting from inside. When you step through the doors, you find a group of grown men wearing elaborate aprons, embroidered sashes, and hats shaped like objects no hat should resemble. They stand in a semicircle, reciting oaths with the solemnity of monks and the choreography of people who learned the steps 5 minutes ago. Someone rings a bell to signal the start of a ritual involving a wooden paddle, 3 candles, and a stuffed owl that has clearly seen better days. No one explains what the owl symbolizes. No one asks. Tradition, you realize, thrives on confusion. As the ceremony ends, the men disperse to tables where they discuss national politics, family affairs, and whether the owl needs new glass eyes. You listen as they congratulate themselves on upholding the ancient values of their organization, though no one can articulate exactly what those values are. One insists it is fraternity. Another says it is charity. A third claims it is vigilance, though he cannot recall what they are meant to be vigilant about. They nod anyway, pleased by their collective dedication to something important, even if unnamed. Curiosity carries you to the next town over, where a women's society meets in a parlor filled with doilies, teacups, and a large portrait of a founder whose expression suggests she disapproved of everything, possibly including the portrait itself. The women gather around a round table to discuss their club's mission, which appears to involve promoting moral refinement through elaborate bake sales and heated debates about acceptable curtain fabrics. A woman reads aloud from a pamphlet titled "Virtues of Domestic Harmony," and the group hums politely, though their eyes spark when the conversation shifts to gossip, a pastime so central to the club that one might consider it a sacred rite. You move on to a lodge famous for its secret handshake. Members greet each other with a gesture involving 3 taps, 2 twists, and an aggressive smile. They insist it is highly confidential, though they perform it in full view of anyone walking by. Inside, they hold meetings illuminated by lanterns shaped like mythical beasts. A man wearing a cape embroidered with lightning bolts lectures the group on the importance of unity. When he raises his staff, which is actually a broomstick wrapped in tinfoil, the members applaud vigorously. A banner overhead declares strength through spectacle. You suspect this motto evolved from trial and error. Farther down the road, you stumble into a club devoted entirely to the appreciation of unusual facial hair. Members sit in a circle comparing mustaches like scholars debating ancient manuscripts. One man claims his curled mustache represents courage. Another argues for sophistication. A third presents his beard as a symbol of natural wisdom. They stroke their whiskers thoughtfully, taking the matter of symbolism quite seriously. When someone suggests forming a beard marching band, the idea is met with unanimous enthusiasm. They begin practicing imaginary instruments with great commitment. In a bustling city, you find a club dedicated to the scientific study of nonsense. Members gather to discuss theories ranging from gravity's emotional state to the migratory habits of clouds. They produce charts filled with arrows and circles that point to other circles. No one expects the theories to make sense. The pleasure lies in building complexity from whimsy. When someone proposes a new hypothesis about the secret language of vegetables, the room erupts in applause. You sense that confusion is not a side effect here, but the glue holding everything together. The more towns you visit, the stranger the clubs become. There are societies devoted to competitive whistling, parades of synchronized spoon tapping, scholarly examinations of imaginary creatures, and a club whose entire purpose is deciding the annual Best Hat Award, a competition marred by bitter rivalries and surprisingly passionate speeches. People join these groups not because they fill essential needs, but because they offer something rarer, a place to belong, a chance to participate in shared absurdity without question. As evening spreads across the landscape, you pause in a quiet town square where several club members from different societies mingle. A man in an owl hat chats with a woman holding a ceremonial teacup. Nearby, a cape-wearing lecturer gives advice to someone with a magnificent beard. No one seems troubled by the contradictions between their club identities. Instead, they share stories, laugh, and trade small tokens of membership as if exchanging pieces of themselves. Watching them, you realize these clubs flourish because people crave connection in a world that often feels too large. They build traditions from scraps of imagination, creating spaces where ordinary lives become theatrical, symbolic, even profound in their own eccentric ways. You leave the square with the sense that while the rituals may be strange and the symbols baffling, the desire behind them is deeply human. And in that strangeness, you find a kind of comfort, as if every club, no matter how peculiar, provides its members a small corner of belonging in a country constantly inventing itself. You step into a rapidly growing city, where brick, timber, and ambition stack themselves into skylines that seem to wobble under the weight of their own enthusiasm. Streets sprawl outward in crooked lines, as if the planners were guided by a compass with emotional issues. Everywhere you look, workers hammer, hoist, and haul, with an energy that suggests they are building not just structures, but entire futures. Even though half the buildings appear to be arguing with gravity, you watch a group of men erect a wooden frame so tall and narrow it sways in the breeze like a nervous performer. The foreman assures everyone that the building will strengthen once the walls are added. The workers nod with confidence that feels more hopeful than factual. As you weave through the noise, you notice two kinds of builders: those who approach their work with meticulous precision, and those who treat construction like a daring conversation with physics. A bricklayer demonstrates perfect technique, aligning bricks with careful taps, while a man beside him confidently places bricks wherever they feel right. The second man explains that intuition trumps measurement. Though his section of wall leans as if attempting to escape, the foreman sighs and decides the wall can be corrected later, perhaps with prayers. You drift toward a half-finished bridge spanning a narrow canal. Engineers consult blueprints, gesturing at neat diagrams that depict a structure far more stable than the reality wobbling before you. One engineer insists the bridge will hold 100 people. A skeptical onlooker points out that the bridge groans under the weight of 2 pigeons. The engineer concedes nothing, explaining that the design includes a revolutionary load distribution technique no one has seen before. This, he says proudly, is innovation. The pigeons flutter off, perhaps sensing their responsibility for stability. Nearby, a group of workers hoists steel beams into place using ropes of questionable freshness. They chant to keep rhythm, though the rhythm occasionally falters when someone trips. As they secure a beam, it shifts slightly, causing everyone to freeze. After a tense moment, one man pats the beam gently as if soothing an unsettled animal. The others nod approvingly, declaring the beam tame. They move on with renewed vigor, ignoring the fact that the beam continues to quiver like a startled violin string. On another street, a building rises with impressive symmetry, the handiwork of an engineer rumored to design structures the way philosophers design arguments. Every joint is reinforced, every angle measured twice. Passers-by admire the craftsmanship, praising the building as a marvel of modern ingenuity. Yet directly across from it stands a structure that appears to be a stack of mismatched boxes, each added as an afterthought. When you ask a worker how the building stands, he shrugs and explains that it has personality. A gust of wind presses against it, and the entire structure creaks ominously, as though considering a dramatic collapse. The worker pats a post and tells it to stay strong. Streetcar tracks snake through the city, with elegant curves in some districts and bewildering zigzags in others. A conductor remarks proudly that the system allows passengers to travel from one end of the city to the other, though he warns that certain turns may cause sudden introspection. You watch a streetcar approach, its wheels screeching in protest as it navigates a corner so sharp it defies the concept of smooth travel. Passengers cling to railings with expressions equal parts thrill and mild nausea. As the day stretches on, scaffolding casts long shadows over shopkeepers, selling everything from bolts to pastries. Children weave between construction sites, treating piles of sand as mountains and discarded beams as balance challenges. The city hums with restless excitement, as if every rattling window and swaying framework contributes to a grand symphony of progress. Even the air feels charged, heavy with sawdust and ambition. At sunset, lamps flicker to life across unfinished terraces and crooked balconies. Workers gather for supper, their laughter echoing off buildings that may or may not survive the next strong storm. They trade stories of projects gone wrong and projects miraculously right. A mason describes a chimney that collapsed inward, but somehow landed exactly where the hearth needed to be. Another boasts that his staircase leans only slightly more than last month. They speak with pride, aware that their work is imperfect yet undeniable proof of growth. You step back to take in the sprawling cityscape, its mixture of brilliance and bewilderment glowing softly beneath the dusk. Some buildings stand tall with unwavering confidence. Others tilt, crack, or settle unevenly, but stand nonetheless, stubborn and hopeful. This place is held together not just by engineering, but by belief, improvisation, and the determination to build something bigger than anyone imagined. And as the night settles, you realize early urban growth is less a triumph of flawless design and more a testament to human persistence, a dance between genius and chaos that somehow, against all odds, shapes a city into existence. You descend into a dim basement illuminated by candles, lanterns, and the warm glow of curiosity pushed slightly beyond its limits. The air carries a faint scent of metal, dust, and something that reminds you of burnt optimism. A man in spectacles hunches over a table cluttered with coils of copper wire, gears of every size, and tools whose purposes are unclear even to him. He mutters about unlocking the future, though the future at the moment appears to be sparking unevenly from a device held together by enthusiasm and string. When he tightens a bolt, the machine whirs, vibrates, and launches a small puff of smoke so dramatically that the inventor declares it a milestone. In the corner, a scientist with wild hair stirs a bubbling mixture in a flask that periodically hisses in a tone you associate with mild disapproval. She insists the concoction will change agriculture forever, though she has not yet decided how. Her notes are scattered across the table in looping handwriting that begins coherently, then spirals into sketches of vegetables with suspicious expressions. When the mixture briefly glows blue, she claps her hands and shouts success, despite not having defined what success means. Nearby, a young tinkerer kneels beside a prototype for a new kind of engine. The prototype looks like a barrel fused to a bicycle, decorated with pipes that lead nowhere. He pumps a pedal, and the machine wheezes awake with the sound of an elderly man reluctantly rising from bed. The tinkerer beams with pride as it sputters forward an inch before collapsing into stillness. He calls it promising, You admire his ability to interpret mechanical exhaustion as potential. At another workbench, an inventor carefully aligns lenses onto a wooden frame, creating a device he claims will allow people to view distant objects with extraordinary clarity. He gestures excitedly toward a window and urges you to test it. You peer through the lenses and see the world magnified, tilted, and tinted slightly green. When you mention this, the inventor nods sagely and explains that green tones sharpen the soul's perception. You are not convinced, but his sincerity is so overwhelming that you agree it is impressive. Across the room, two men argue over the correct placement of a lever on a contraption covered in levers already. They insist their machine will revolutionize communication, allowing messages to travel instantly across great distances. When they demonstrate by pulling one lever, the machine emits a series of thunks followed by a triumphant ping. They cheer. You ask what message was sent. They consult their notes, then declare that the message probably announced its own success. You realize they are less concerned with function than with the exhilaration of possibility. Against the far wall, an inventor works on a device designed to harness electricity. Though he appears uncertain about which parts require insulation, sparks flicker as he connects wires, illuminating his delighted expression. He swears he is on the brink of capturing lightning in a controlled form. You consider whether this room is an appropriate location for such ambition, especially when he begins tapping the device with a hammer in hopes of encouraging cooperation. The sparks brighten, then abruptly vanish. He nods with satisfaction, claiming the machine is contemplating its next move. In another corner, a scientist experiments with magnets, arranging them in patterns that form a kind of metallic mosaic. When he adds one more piece, the entire structure shivers and reconfigures into a different shape altogether. He laughs so loudly the others look up in alarm. He scribbles down notes, explaining that he has discovered a new principle of attraction. You suspect he is overselling it, but the moment feels so earnest you do not correct him. Throughout the basement, the collective hum of invention rises and falls like an improvised symphony. Tools clatter, liquids bubble, devices groan as though they are alive and negotiating their responsibilities. Every failure becomes a stepping stone. Every spark becomes a sign. You sense that the chaos here is not a hindrance, but the environment in which breakthroughs thrive. These inventors are not hindered by uncertainty. They are powered by it. As the night deepens, the inventors gather around a table cluttered with half-finished ideas. They discuss theories, share triumphs, and laugh at the failures that nearly set something on fire. You see in their faces a stubborn belief that the future can be coaxed from gears, glass, and unrefined dreams. They build not because they are confident, but because they cannot stop imagining what might be possible. And in this flickering basement full of questionable tools, you witness the messy, unpredictable birth of innovation, fueled by determination, curiosity, and just enough recklessness to change the world. You slip into the back of a crowded chamber just as a hush falls over the room. People lean forward, eager, puzzled, delighted, and mortified all at once, the perfect emotional palette for what appears to be a political scandal unraveling with the subtlety of a parade. At the center of the chaos stands a senator who insists he has been unfairly accused of misusing government funds, though the definition of misuse becomes hazier each time he explains it. He claims the expenses were essential for morale. Someone asks why morale required the purchase of a mechanical singing trout. He answers confidently that the trout boosted productivity. No one can identify whose productivity, but the senator presses on as though logic is a minor obstacle. Another representative bursts into the hall waving papers overhead, declaring he has evidence of a conspiracy involving missing office chairs. He accuses a rival of stealing them to sabotage the Committee on Interior Comfort. His rival returns fire by claiming the chairs were never stolen at all, but simply relocated to facilitate better thinking. This raises the question of whether thought can be improved by chair relocation, but no one sticks with that question long enough to reach an answer. Instead, the room erupts into multiple, overlapping arguments about upholstery, leadership integrity, and the ethics of excessive lumbar support. You drift from group to group, catching fragments of confessions, rebuttals, and explanations that sound increasingly improvised. A clerk claims she witnessed a representative sneaking out of a meeting with a suspiciously shaped bundle. When pressed, she admits the bundle may have been a rolled-up carpet. The representative in question denies this and adds that even if it were a carpet, it was borrowed legally. Immediately, half the chamber begins debating criteria for legal carpet borrowing. A man in the back pounds the table to declare that all carpets belong to the people. Meanwhile, a governor who was summoned to testify tries to explain why he funded a project to train pigeons for emergency communication. He insists the idea was visionary. Critics argue the pigeons failed their training. He counters by noting that the pigeons may have been having an off day. When asked how many pigeons were involved, he says quite a few and refuses to elaborate. This only raises more questions, prompting a subcommittee to form on the spot to investigate pigeon accountability. In another corner, a representative tearfully confesses to accidentally approving a bill he had not read. He claims he mistook it for a birthday card because it had a festive ribbon attached. His colleagues gasp as if encountering a profound tragedy, though some whisper that they too have signed documents they do not fully understand. One man admits he once voted yes because he liked the color of the ink. Another confesses he voted no because he disliked the smell of the room. They consider establishing new voting guidelines based on clearer packaging and improved ventilation. Through it all, reporters scratch notes furiously, trying to keep pace with the calamity unfolding like a series of unsupervised fires. Each revelation seems stranger than the last, yet no one appears particularly surprised. It is as though everyone has silently agreed that politics is at its most honest when it abandons dignity entirely. Scandal, it seems, has become a kind of folk entertainment, an ongoing performance where the audience is never quite sure whether to laugh, groan, or applaud. As arguments crescendo, a young aide rushes forward with an announcement that the missing office chairs have been found. They were stacked in a storage room for reasons no one remembers. The original accuser accuses the storage room itself of suspicious behavior. Laughter ripples through the chamber. Even the rival wipes his brow, relieved yet disappointed, as though the scandal ending so abruptly feels like the premature conclusion of a gripping play. By the time the session adjourns, no one has resolved anything substantial. The mechanical trout still sings. The pigeons remain unaccounted for. The ribbon-wrapped bill sits on a desk, awaiting someone brave enough to read it. You linger as the politicians disperse, each one convinced the chaos was someone else's fault. Their disputes trail behind them like loose threads, ready to be woven into the next uproar. And as you walk out of the chamber, you realize that these scandals feel scripted, not because they lack authenticity, but because they reveal the full theatrical depth of human ambition, insecurity, and improvisation. In this world, politics is less about order and more about the endlessly creative ways people find to step on their own feet while insisting they are dancing. You find yourself standing in the hallway of a bustling state capitol just as a governor bursts from his office with the energy of a man fueled by equal parts inspiration and dangerously strong coffee. His staff scrambles after him, clutching notebooks, quills, maps, and the collective hope that whatever idea he unveils will require fewer emergency meetings than the last one. He strides down the hallway declaring that he has solved transportation forever, and his staff stiffens because the last time he said this, he suggested citizens ride in giant rolling barrels. Today, he unveils a sketch of elevated walkways suspended from balloons. The staff stares at the drawing, struggling to find a polite way to ask if wind has been factored in. The governor assures them that bold ideas do not require details at the start. Sometimes details bloom later. You linger as the idea spreads through the room. Advisors whisper frantically. One mutters that balloons can be unpredictable. Another insists citizens are resilient. A third quietly asks whether floating sidewalks count as infrastructure or air travel. Before anyone reaches a conclusion, the governor announces that they will move on to his second initiative, this one concerning wildlife. He explains that squirrels should be trained to distribute acorns strategically across state forests. His staff blinks in unison. The governor clarifies that such training could improve reforestation. Someone gently points out that squirrels already distribute acorns. The governor waves this away, convinced squirrels require formal guidance. In the next meeting room, another governor prepares to unveil his own grand plan. He speaks with reverence as he introduces the idea of building a gigantic fountain in the town square, one that shoots water so high it can be seen from neighboring states. His staff quickly calculates the amount of water required and begins imagining catastrophic gusts of wind. The governor remains undeterred. He declares that monumental fountains inspire civic pride. An aide lightly reminds him that citizens are currently concerned about broken roads. The governor nods thoughtfully and decides the fountain should be even larger, perhaps adding colored lights. His staff writes this down very slowly, as if hoping delay will save them. You wander into another governor's office, where a team of exhausted aides circles a chalkboard filled with diagrams representing an ambitious agricultural reform plan. The governor explains that farms should rotate crops in a spiral pattern to encourage positive energy flow. When asked what positive energy means, he smiles serenely and says it is self-explanatory. His staff tries to determine whether spiral planting will confuse horses. The governor is already outlining a second phase of the plan that involves musical instruments placed in fields to encourage crop morale. His aides scribble notes while silently negotiating which instrument will frighten livestock the least. Farther down the hall, a governor reviews a proposal for the state's economy. He believes prosperity can be achieved by encouraging every household to adopt a goat. When questioned about practical challenges, he insists that goats provide companionship, lawn maintenance, and potential side income. The staff attempts to calculate how many goats exist in the region. The governor interrupts, explaining that goats will naturally appear as enthusiasm grows. His staff stares at him, wondering if a leader can manifest livestock through sheer willpower. As afternoon deepens, you watch all these governors gather for a joint press conference. Each steps to the podium with the confidence of someone absolutely convinced their idea is the key to a glorious future. Floating sidewalks, monumental fountains, spiral farms, goat economies. They smile at the crowd as if unveiling the next era of civilization. Behind them, their staff stands with composed expressions masking the internal storm of logistics, budgets, and the haunting question of whether sleep has become a luxury. You follow the staff afterward as they scramble to draft polite explanations, adjust expectations, and quietly redirect resources toward plans that may actually work. They work late into the night, lanterns glowing across the tables, determination steady despite the absurdity. You sense their weary pride, because even wild ideas contain sparks worth shaping. And sometimes, beneath the impractical dreams, lies a kernel of innovation that might one day grow into something real. As you leave the capital, the air hums with ambition, chaos, and the unmistakable human tendency to dream too big and too strangely. You realize these governors push ideas not because they lack sense, but because possibility feels irresistible, and their staff, caught between vision and reality, carries the quiet burden of turning wildness into progress. You wander into a cluttered workshop where gears, springs, and half-assembled contraptions cover every surface like artifacts from a future that changed its mind halfway through being invented. The first inventor you meet beams with pride as he unveils his latest creation, a device designed to fold socks automatically. The machine resembles a small wooden cage filled with metal arms, each jerking in a pattern that suggests confusion more than intelligence. He places a sock inside. The machine twitches, whirs, and launches the sock across the room. The inventor claps with delight, declaring that it demonstrates excellent enthusiasm. You suspect enthusiasm was not the intended function, but he is already sketching improvements with the zeal of a man who refuses to be hindered by details. In the next corner, a woman hovers over a device meant to wake heavy sleepers by gently shaking their beds. She turns it on, and the entire bed frame shudders with such violent determination that you fear it may escape the workshop entirely. She nods thoughtfully, adjusting a lever and making a note that reads too assertive. With a few more tweaks, the device softens into a gentle nudge that still manages to toss a pillow into the air. She calls it promising and moves on, already imagining a version that can also brew coffee. Nearby, another inventor is testing a machine meant to sharpen pencils. The device is large enough to sharpen logs, constructed with what appears to be repurposed farm equipment. He feeds a pencil into the opening, and the machine emits a triumphant roar before spitting out something that resembles a wooden toothpick with ambitions. He proudly describes the machine as precise. You watch it chew 3 more pencils into splinters before he admits precision might be a future goal. In a quieter corner, a young inventor whispers to a contraption shaped like an oversized beetle. She explains that it is a mechanical messenger designed to scuttle across town, delivering notes without tiring or losing focus. When she winds it up, the beetle scurries forward, pauses, turns in a circle, and then sprints toward a wall with unwavering commitment. It bumps into the wall and continues pushing with stubborn determination. She smiles proudly, explaining that determination is crucial for messengers. You refrain from mentioning that direction might matter too. Another workshop table holds a series of bells attached to tubes and levers. An inventor demonstrates how his creation can automatically ring to signal weather changes. As he explains the mechanism, a bell chimes loudly, startling everyone. He checks the sky through the window and concludes the bell must be forecasting a shift in humidity. Moments later, another bell rings. He looks puzzled, leans closer, and whispers that the machine sometimes becomes emotional. The crowd accepts this explanation with polite nods because no one wants to discourage him. You drift to a man fiddling with a wearable umbrella that opens and closes in response to raindrops. The device is balanced on his head, with straps that appear to have been borrowed from horse tack. When he steps outside to test it, the umbrella snaps open so forcefully it nearly lifts him off the ground. He stumbles back inside, hair disheveled and pride intact. He declares the mechanism slightly too eager and jots down notes while the umbrella continues to twitch above him like a creature awaiting further orders. In the final corner, you meet an inventor building a device that can clap for you when you accomplish something important. He demonstrates by pulling a lever, causing 2 wooden paddles to smack together rhythmically. He explains with absolute seriousness that people deserve applause even when no one is nearby. The machine claps again, louder this time, as if proud of its own contribution. You watch him fine-tune the rhythm until it sounds genuinely celebratory. As the inventors share their creations with each other, the room fills with the whirring, clanking, buzzing music of ideas being tested, altered, and dreamed into existence. No one questions whether any of these inventions are necessary. They celebrate the act of creation itself, the joy of pursuing a thought simply because it appeared. Failures become jokes. Malfunctioning parts become lessons. Every strange device is met with admiration, not judgment. By the time you leave the workshop, the sun has dipped low, casting warm light across windows, rattling with the heartbeat of experimentation. You realize these inventors build not because the world demands it, but because their minds cannot sit still. They create because imagination insists on expression, no matter how impractical, unnecessary, or delightfully chaotic the result may be. And in their cluttered workshops, surrounded by sparks of possibility, innovation becomes not a destination, but a constant, joyful impulse. You arrive in a bustling town square just as trumpets blare with heroic enthusiasm, announcing the start of a parade so extravagant it suggests something monumental is being commemorated. Townsfolk line the streets, waving flags, cheering, and tossing confetti that sparkles in the sunlight. You glance at a banner stretched across the main road, proclaiming the annual celebration of the Great Turnip Uprising. A child beside you proudly explains that the uprising was a pivotal moment in local history. Though when pressed, she admits no one really knows what happened. You suspect nothing at all happened, but the parade proceeds with such confidence that doubt feels impolite. At the front of the procession marches a group of actors dressed as rebellious turnips, each wearing a painted burlap sack and carrying wooden pitchforks. They shout slogans about root vegetable independence, while the crowd roars with approval. An older man whispers excitedly that his grandfather fought bravely in the uprising, though he cannot recall which side he supported. You watch as the actors break into a choreographed routine involving slow lunges and dramatic rolling. The crowd gasps, applauds, and leans forward as though watching a historical reenactment rather than an imagination set free in costume form. Behind them rolls a grand float, displaying a glittering replica of a turnip throne, atop which a performer sits with regal posture. She waves to the crowd with a serene expression despite balancing a comically large root crown on her head. Onlookers place hands over their hearts, overcome with patriotic sentiment. You overhear someone explaining that the Turnip Queen once united the territory through diplomacy and root-based wisdom. When a friend questions whether queens existed in the region, the explanation shifts seamlessly to symbolic queenship, which seems both vague and sufficient. Next comes a marching band dressed in uniforms that shimmer with metallic threads, playing a triumphant anthem allegedly from the uprising era. The song swells with noble chords, though it sounds suspiciously inspired by a tune you heard in a tavern last night. The band members march with absolute conviction. Their leader waves a baton shaped like a turnip stalk and shouts encouragement that borders on spiritual fervor. People sway to the music, some even wiping away tears, though you doubt any of them could explain the emotional significance if asked. A local historian rides past on horseback, reading from a scroll he claims contains the original proclamation that ended the uprising. The scroll looks freshly painted, ink glistening in the sun, and the words resemble inspirational phrases stitched on decorative pillows. Crowds lean in reverently, nodding as though absorbing sacred truth. The historian holds the scroll high, convinced he is preserving legacy, even if the legacy was invented last decade. The parade continues with increasing creativity. One float reenacts the legendary Battle of the Cellar, in which settlers allegedly defended their food stores from rebellious produce. Actors dressed as carrots and potatoes dramatically surrender, waving tiny white flags. Children cheer wildly. Another float displays the Reconstruction era, showcasing people rebuilding fields after the uprising's damage. They scatter fake seeds across the route with solemn commitment. Someone shouts that the land healed quickly thanks to community spirit. The crowd cheers again. You drift with the parade as it turns down the main street, where festivities spill into shop doorways. Bakers hand out commemorative pastries shaped like victorious vegetables. A seamstress sells miniature turnip flags stitched with slogans like "Stand firm and grow proudly." A group of poets recites verses honoring sacrifices no one can quite name. Every participant seems certain that the celebration protects something sacred, though the details remain delightfully fuzzy. As the parade reaches its finale, the mayor steps onto a stage adorned with garlands of purple and green. She delivers a stirring speech about courage, unity, and the lessons learned from an uprising that absolutely did not occur. The crowd listens with rapt devotion, nodding at each dramatic pause. You recognize the speech as a patchwork of sentiments borrowed from other holidays, but no one seems to mind. The mayor ends by declaring that history is what binds communities together, regardless of whether the history happened. When dusk settles, lanterns glow along the streets and music drifts through the air. Families gather for a feast featuring turnip dishes cooked with ceremonial reverence. You watch them laugh, share stories, and argue good-naturedly about which fictional event deserves a float next year. The celebration is not rooted in accuracy but in shared identity, a collective devotion to belonging. You realize, as laughter ripples across the square, that patriotic spectacles like this thrive because they transform imagination into tradition. The truth becomes secondary to the joy of celebration, and in the glow of lanterns and confetti, the invented past feels just as powerful as anything carved into stone. You step into the early 20th century just as the air fills with the hum of invention and uncertainty. The scent of coal smoke blending with the optimism of people convinced the future has already begun. You wander a street where automobiles sputter past horses, where pedestrians step carefully between two competing eras, unsure which one has the right of way. A policeman blows his whistle with theatrical confidence, though he is unclear on whether he is signaling the cars, the horses, or the general existential confusion of modernity. Behind him hangs a newly posted ordinance forbidding citizens from walking backward on Sundays, a rule no one can explain, but everyone obeys because ignoring it feels like tempting fate. You continue to drift and find yourself in a laboratory filled with earnest scientists, testing inventions that appear both promising and deeply questionable. One man adjusts a suit covered in metal plates and declares it the future of personal aviation. When he jumps from a small platform, the suit clatters loudly, refusing to fly, instead offering him a harsh introduction to the floor. He insists he simply needs better boots. Another scientist demonstrates a device meant to translate animal thoughts into human speech. The machine produces only static and an occasional beep, which the scientist confidently interprets as the beginning of meaningful dialogue. Outside, the world shifts again as streetcars rattle past vendors selling foods no one has tasted before, the country experimenting even with its palate. A sign announces the prohibition of certain spices deemed too rambunctious for national consumption. Meanwhile, politicians debate whether dancing styles should be regulated for public safety. One senator argues that feet moving too quickly risk moral decline. Another suggests that some dances might uplift the economy. The debate spills into newspapers, and soon the entire nation argues about rhythm. You find yourself drifting through a fairground where crowds marvel at inventions that toe the line between genius and architectural hazard. A man proudly exhibits a house designed to rotate with the sun. When it begins rotating slightly faster than intended, visitors cling to furniture while he assures them acceleration is part of the charm. Nearby, a woman demonstrates an early attempt at robotic housekeeping. The machine sweeps diligently until it becomes transfixed by its own reflection and begins sweeping the same spot repeatedly, with the devotion of a monk polishing a single stone. Farther along, you encounter new laws meant to protect citizens from the dangers of modernity. One prohibits whistling after sundown unless one has obtained the proper documentation. Another bans the use of overly dramatic hats in public buildings. People adapt with good humor, folding whimsy into the rhythm of daily life. You overhear a group discussing a recently passed law requiring all bicycles to have names. They debate whether names should be sentimental or motivational, until a man suggests his bicycle chose its own name by vibrating menacingly when he offered alternatives. War arrives and reshapes everything. Factories roar with newfound purpose. People gather around radios that crackle with news they strain to understand, the nation reinventing unity through shared static. You watch as communities organize drives, ration supplies, and navigate uncertainty with a determination both humble and fierce. After the war, the world changes again. Fashion loosens. Music leans forward. The air itself begins to vibrate with possibility as people build suburbs, highways, and expectations larger than anything previously imagined. You drift into the 50s where optimism becomes structured, laminated, and mass-produced. Posters encourage conformity with cheerful illustrations. Children assemble model rockets as though preparing for cosmic citizenship. Scientists test new household chemicals with the enthusiasm of explorers discovering continents, unaware that some of their miraculous solutions come with unintended consequences. Meanwhile, the government quietly debates rules about which colors of lawn furniture best represent national values. The 60s erupt in a whirlwind of sound, dissent, and reinvention. You watch as young people challenge old assumptions, pushing the nation into a conversation it did not expect, but desperately needs. Laws evolve, sometimes stumbling forward, sometimes tripping over contradictions. Experiments in culture, science, and governance cascade across the decade. Not all succeed, but even failures spark movement. Progress often looks like chaos viewed too closely. Across the decades, you notice a pattern. Each era crafts rules because it fears the unknown, then breaks them because curiosity wins. Each generation experiments wildly, fails spectacularly, and then chooses to keep the few things that actually work. Reinvention sneaks in through back doors, emerging from ideas dismissed as too odd, too bold, or too premature. And as the century draws toward its end, you stand in a world transformed by mistakes, marvels, and moments of spontaneous creation. You realize the nation never stops tinkering with itself, never stops rewriting its own instructions, never stops testing the boundaries of what it could be. Reinvention is not an event here, it is the atmosphere, woven into every law, every experiment, every era that rushes forward faster than anyone can fully understand. You breathe in that atmosphere, tasting both the uncertainty and the promise, and drift onward into whatever the country imagines next. You arrive in the present day and find the landscape humming with screens, satellites, and people walking briskly while staring at devices that seem determined to surprise them. At first glance, it looks like everything has changed, like the past folded itself neatly and placed it on a high shelf out of reach. But as you wander through crowded streets and restless towns, you feel something familiar beneath the noise, as if history is whispering through the seams of modern life. The same cheerful chaos that once paraded through turnip festivals and experimental laboratories now pulses through digital feeds, headline scrolls, and trends that bloom and vanish in a week. You stop at a coffee shop where customers debate whether a viral conspiracy about migrating houseplants holds any truth. They lean in with the same earnestness, once reserved for debating the moral risks of stair climbing or the deep symbolism of lantern hogs. A man at the counter insists his houseplant has shifted positions overnight. Another argues that plants have always migrated emotionally. The conversation spirals until someone cites an influencer who claims to have interviewed a particularly insightful fern. You sip your drink and realize you have seen this before, only the outfits have changed. Farther down the street, you spot a parade forming, one that celebrates an event that may or may not have happened last year, or ever. Marchers carry banners emblazoned with slogans so general they could apply to almost anything. A float rolls by decorated with foam lightning bolts, honoring a local legend someone arguably invented while bored in a waiting room. Spectators cheer with patriotic zeal, snapping photos, creating memories for an event still shaping its own identity. The spectacle feels entirely modern, yet unmistakably connected to those 19th century celebrations of imaginary triumphs. In a park, a group performs team-building exercises involving blindfolds, foam swords, and a set of rules that change every few minutes. They claim the activity improves communication. Though most conversations consist of enthusiastic shouting, it reminds you of political assemblies where lawmakers once invented crimes just to triumph over them. Here, the stakes are lower, but the spirit is the same, a frantic attempt to control chaos by creating new forms of it. You wander past a tech expo filled with inventors whose devices blink and chirp with promise. One shows a household robot that can sort your belongings but becomes emotionally overwhelmed when encountering tangled cords. Another demonstrates a drone that delivers soup directly to your window, though it occasionally drops meals onto unsuspecting pedestrians. A third touts a wearable translator that should convert pet sounds into human language, though it currently interprets every bark as the phrase, "feeling complicated." The inventors beam with pride, their optimism unshaken by the small matter of functionality. You have seen these people in basements full of magnets and questionable tonics, only now they have glossy logos. On a nearby corner, someone live streams a monologue about national identity, passionately arguing that the country must return to its roots, though no one can agree which roots those are. Comments flood in from strangers across the map, some supportive, some bewildered, many simply curious about the speaker's hat. The conversation shifts rapidly, dissolving into debates about snacks, fashion, and whether cows experience nostalgia. It feels chaotic, absurd, and strangely sincere, a digital echo of countless town meetings where history shaped itself through argument and improvisation. As evening settles, you drift into a quiet neighborhood lit by porch lights and humming air conditioners. Families gather around screens, laughing at jokes that spread faster than any stagecoach rumor ever could. Children ask questions about the world that adults answer with confidence or creative deflection. A jogger runs past wearing glowing shoes that promise better performance. Someone calls out to a neighbor to ask how long the new gadget in his yard is supposed to beep. The neighbor explains he has no idea but enjoys the suspense. You realize that the present is not a break from the past, but its continuation, wearing updated shoes and carrying a portable charger. The same inventive chaos that fueled quack medical tonics now fuels questionable wellness fads. The same eager myth-making that built outlaw legends now builds internet icons overnight. The same enthusiasm for solutions no one requested still thrives in boardrooms, garages, and late-night brainstorming sessions. As you stand beneath a sky streaked with airplane lights and satellite paths, you see the entire arc of history shimmering at once, all its quirks and contradictions alive in this moment. The American spirit never grew less bizarre. It simply shifted tone, swapped costumes, upgraded tools, and embraced new ways to chase the improbable. And as the night settles gently across the grid of glowing streets, you understand that the adventure was never about reaching the present. It was about recognizing that the story, with all its strange brilliance, is still unfolding, still improvising, still proudly itself.